Henry Shaw pressed the gun barrel against Rachel's temple and smiled. "Tell Brennan I'm coming for what's mine, and this time I'll kill everyone who stands in my way, starting with that worthless dog." The message reached Walter Brennan 3 days before Shaw's men surrounded his property, 3 days before bullets flew through the night, 3 days before a dying border collie would save everything Walter loved. But this story doesn't begin with violence. It begins with laughter. The cruel, cutting laughter of a family who watched a 62-year-old man with a failing heart spend his last $200 on a crumbling Apache shack that everyone called cursed. They stopped laughing when his dog found the secret room. Before we continue, I invite you to subscribe to our channel and follow this incredible story to the very end. Drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels across the world. Now, let us return to the beginning. Walter Brennan knew something was wrong the moment Henry Shaw refused to step onto the property. They stood at the boundary marker, 2 men separated by an invisible line that Shaw would not cross. The seller's hands trembled as he clutched the deed. His eyes kept darting toward the wooden structure behind Walter, toward a building that leaned so drastically it seemed to defy the laws of physics. "You brought the money," Shaw's voice cracked on the last word. Walter nodded slowly. He'd been watching this man for the past 10 minutes, cataloging every nervous gesture, every furtive glance. Something about Henry Shaw screamed desperation. $200, cash, just like we agreed. Shaw reached for the money, but Walter pulled it back. The deed first. Shaw's jaw tightened. For a moment, Walter thought the man might simply walk away from the entire transaction. Instead, Shaw thrust the document forward like it burned his fingers. "Take it. Take the whole cursed place." Walter accepted the deed but didn't release the money. "Cursed." Shaw's laugh was hollow, broken. "That's what everyone says. 3 families have tried to make something of this land. Every single one of them failed. The Martinez family lasted 2 years before their crops died, and their well went dry. The Hendersons made it 18 months before their eldest son disappeared one night and never came back. And me," Shaw rubbed the thick scar across his left palm, "I lasted long enough to know some places don't want to be lived in." "Then why did you stay?" Shaw's eyes met Walter's for the first time. Something flickered there, something that looked almost like warning. "I had my reasons. Reasons that don't concern you anymore." He grabbed the money from Walter's hand with sudden force. "The place is yours now. Every rotting board, every cracked stone, every inch of ground that refuses to grow anything but weeds." He turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing, Brennan. The back corner of the main room. Stay away from it." "Why?" Shaw's face went pale. "The Apache who built this place, they weren't just passing through. They lived here for decades. Generations, maybe, and they left things behind." "What kind of things?" "Well, bad luck things." Shaw's voice dropped to a whisper. "Things that should stay buried. Promise me you'll stay away from that corner." Walter studied the man before him. Fear. That's what he saw in Henry Shaw's eyes. Genuine, bone-deep fear. "I promise nothing," Walter said quietly. "This property is mine now. Every corner of it." Something shifted in Shaw's expression. The fear remained, but now it mingled with something else. Calculation. Hunger. "Your funeral, old man." Shaw mounted his horse without looking back. "Your funeral." Walter watched him ride away, disappearing around the bend in the road. Only when Shaw was completely out of sight did Walter turn to face his new home. The structure was everything his family had warned him about. The walls leaned at angles that shouldn't support a roof. The windows were dark, empty eyes staring out at the desert. Patches of mismatched materials covered the roof like scars from a dozen desperate repairs. But Walter saw something else. Something that had pulled at him since he first heard about this property 3 weeks ago. Potential. Hidden beneath the decay, waiting for someone patient enough to find it. A bark broke his concentration. Copper had been sitting patiently by the wagon throughout the entire transaction, but now the border collie was on his feet, every muscle tense with attention. "What is it, boy?" Copper didn't look at Walter. The dog's mismatched eyes, one blue and one brown, were fixed on the shack with an intensity that Walter had never seen before. Then Copper ran. The dog bolted across the property line, past the broken fence, and disappeared through the crooked doorway before Walter could call out his name. "Copper, Copper, wait!" Walter followed as quickly as his aging body would allow. His heart, that traitorous organ that the doctor said could stop any day now, pounded against his ribs as he crossed the threshold into darkness. It took his eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, he found Copper in the back corner of the main room, pawing at the floorboards with frantic urgency. the exact corner Shaw had warned him to avoid. "Copper, come here. Come here, boy." The dog ignored him completely. His claws scraped against wood that looked identical to every other board in the room, but Copper acted as if the most important thing in the world lay just beneath that specific spot. Walter knelt beside his dog, placing a weathered hand on Copper's back. The animal was trembling, not from fear, from urgency, from certainty. "What do you smell down there, boy? What are you trying to tell me?" Copper paused long enough to look at Walter. In those mismatched eyes, Walter saw something that made his breath catch. "Trust me, I've never been wrong." It was true. In 8 years together, Copper had never led Walter astray. The dog had warned him about the rattlesnake in the barn, had known the drought was coming 3 weeks before the first crops died, had sensed Sarah's illness months before the doctors found anything wrong. Copper always knew. "All right, boy." Walter's voice was barely a whisper. "Show me what you found." The next morning, Walter loaded his wagon with everything he owned and made the journey back to his new property. The wooden wheels creaked against the rocky trail, and Copper trotted alongside his tail, wagging with an enthusiasm that seemed to grow stronger with every step toward their destination. But first, there was one stop Walter had to make. Thomas Brennan's ranch was the finest in the county. White fences stretched as far as the eye could see, surrounding pastures filled with healthy cattle and well-maintained buildings. Everything about the place spoke of success, of careful planning, of a life lived without the constant struggle that had defined Walter's existence. Walter found his brother on the front porch, coffee cup in hand, already wearing the expression of smug superiority that had characterized their relationship for decades. "Well, well." Thomas set down his cup with deliberate slowness. "The prodigal brother returns. Come to beg for help already." "I came to tell you I'm moving on to the property today." Thomas laughed, a genuine full-bodied laugh that echoed across his pristine yard. "Moving in? In Walter, that place doesn't have walls in some rooms. The roof leaks, the foundation is cracked, and I'm betting the whole structure will collapse the first time a strong wind blows through. Then I'll rebuild it." "With what money?" Thomas stood up, his voice sharpening. "You spent everything you had on that worthless piece of dirt. Father's inheritance, your savings, every dollar you put aside for 20 years, gone, vanished, thrown away on a cursed Apache shack that 3 families before you couldn't make work. Maybe I'll be different." Different? Thomas descended the porch steps, closing the distance between them. "Brother, look at yourself. You're 62 years old, your heart's failing, your wife's dead, your farm's gone, and you think you're going to be different from the Martinez family, from the Hendersons, from Henry Shaw." Walter felt the familiar sting of his brother's words. They'd had this conversation before in various forms throughout their entire lives. Thomas succeeding. Walter struggling. Thomas building an empire. Walter watching his crumble. "I think," Walter said slowly, "that I'm going to prove everyone wrong, including you." "And what if you don't?" Thomas grabbed Walter's arm. "What if you die out there alone in that falling down shack with nothing but that dog to witness it? What then, Walter? What happens to your daughter, to your grandson?" "My daughter and grandson will inherit property that I refuse to give up on, just like Sarah would have wanted." The mention of his late wife's name made Thomas release his grip. Even now, 3 years after Sarah's death, her memory carried weight between the two brothers. Sarah had been the peacemaker, the one who kept the family connected despite its fractures. Without her, everything seemed to be falling apart. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," Thomas said quietly. "And when it all falls apart, don't expect me to pick up the pieces." Walter climbed back onto his wagon. "I've never expected anything from you, Thomas. Why would I start now?" He flicked the reins, and the horses began to move. Copper fell into step beside the wagon, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, on the destination that called to him with a force neither human could understand. Thomas watched them go, his expression caught somewhere between anger and something that might have been concern. "You'll be back?" he shouted after them. "Within a month you'll come crawling back, broken and begging." Walter didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He'd spent his whole life listening to people tell him he would fail. This time he was going to prove them all wrong. The property looked even worse in the full light of day. Walter spent his first hour simply walking the perimeter, cataloging every crack, every leak, every sign of decay that his $200 had purchased. The main structure, tilted dramatically to the left, held upright only by makeshift wooden braces that previous owners had added over the years. The roof showed at least 7 different types of patching material, each one representing another desperate attempt to keep the rain out. But as Walter looked more closely, he began to see what others had missed. The foundation stones were massive, granite blocks that would have cost a fortune to transport and place. Someone had invested serious resources in building this place long before the wooden structure above it began to rot. And the frame, despite its current lean, showed craftsmanship that belonged to an earlier era. Hand-cut joints fitted together with precision that modern builders rarely achieved. Whoever built this place had intended it to last for generations. Why had it fallen into such disrepair? The answer, Walter suspected, lay in the corner where Copper had resumed his vigil. The dog hadn't moved from that spot since they arrived. He sat perfectly still, staring at the floorboards with an intensity that seemed almost painful. Every few minutes he would whine softly, then return to his silent watching. "Copper, you need to eat." The dog's tail wagged briefly at the sound of his name, but he didn't move. "At least drink some water. You've been sitting there for hours." Nothing. Walter approached the corner and knelt beside his dog. The floorboards looked exactly like all the others. Same wood, same weathering, same gaps between the planks. But Copper knew something was different, and Walter had learned over 8 years of partnership to trust his dog's instincts. "All right, boy, I hear you." Walter pressed his palm against the wood, feeling for anything unusual. "But whatever's down there, it'll still be there tomorrow. Tonight, we both need rest." Copper finally looked at him. Those mismatched eyes held something that Walter could only describe as apology. "I can't stop. I'm sorry, but I can't stop." That night, Walter lay on his makeshift bed listening to the constant scratch of Copper's claws against the floorboards. The sound was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Scrape, scrape, scrape. A pattern that continued hour after hour, as if the dog had dedicated his entire existence to reaching whatever lay beneath. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams of Sarah. In the dream, she sat beside him on the bed, her hand resting on his chest where his failing heart struggled to keep beating. "Trust him," she whispered. "When Copper tells you something matters, believe him." Walter woke to sunlight streaming through gaps in the walls. His body ached from sleeping on a thin mattress laid over wooden planks. His heart felt sluggish, uncertain, but what made him sit up in alarm was the silence. Copper had stopped scratching. Walter scrambled to the corner, fear gripping his throat. Had Copper collapsed? Had the dog's obsessive digging finally exhausted him beyond recovery? What he found was worse. Copper lay beside the floorboards, his paws bloody and raw. The dog had worked through the entire night, scraping away years of accumulated dirt and wear from between the wooden planks. His claws were worn down to nothing, cracked and bleeding. "Oh, Copper, oh God, boy, what have you done to yourself?" The dog lifted his head weakly, his tail moved once, twice. His eyes found Walter's face and held there with an expression that broke Walter's heart. "I found it. I found where you need to look." Walter cradled his dog's head in his lap, tears streaming down his weathered face. This animal had been his only companion since Sarah died, had been his reason to keep going when everything else fell apart. And now Copper had nearly destroyed himself trying to show Walter something that no one else could see. "You stubborn, loyal, beautiful fool," Walter whispered. "Whatever's under there better be worth it." It took 3 days before Copper could walk without limping. During that time, Walter bandaged the dog's paws with strips torn from his own shirts. He carried Copper outside for fresh air and sunshine. He hand-fed him water and scraps of meat, refusing to leave his companion's side for more than a few minutes at a time. And he stared at the scratched floorboards, wondering what secret they contained. Copper had focused his efforts on a rectangular section roughly 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. The scratches followed the lines between specific planks as if the dog had been trying to outline something hidden beneath. On the 4th day, Maggie arrived. Walter heard the wagon approaching and met his daughter at the property line. She looked tired, worried, older than her 34 years. Raising a child alone while watching her father slowly lose everything had taken its toll. "Papa," she embraced him tightly. "I've been so worried. Thomas said you refused to come back to the family ranch, said you'd rather die out here than admit you made a mistake." "Thomas says a lot of things." Walter released her, searching her face for signs of the daughter he remembered. "How's Jimmy?" "He's at school. He wanted to come, but I thought it was better to check on you first, to see if this place was..." She trailed off, looking at the dilapidated shack behind her father. "Safe?" Walter finished for her. "Habitable, worth saving. All of those things. Come inside, there's something you need to see." Maggie followed her father into the shack, her eyes taking in the leaning walls, the patched roof, the sparse furnishings. But what stopped her in her tracks was the corner. Copper lay beside the scratched floorboards, his bandaged paws tucked beneath him. He lifted his head when Maggie entered his tail, wagging weakly in recognition. "Oh, Copper." Maggie knelt beside the dog, her hands gentle on his graying fur. "What happened to you, boy?" "He's been digging," Walter said. "For 4 days straight, he wouldn't stop. Nearly killed himself trying to reach whatever's under those boards." Maggie looked at the scratched section of floor, her expression shifting from concern to curiosity. She was her mother's daughter, raised on carpentry and construction. Sarah had taught her to read wood the way other children learn to read books. "Papa, these boards have been replaced." "What?" Maggie traced her finger along one of the edges. "Look here. The nail heads are newer than the surrounding boards, and the wood grain doesn't match the adjacent planks." She pressed her palm flat against the suspicious section. "This isn't a repair. Someone pulled up these boards and put them back down, recently." "How recently?" "Within the last year or two, maybe less." Maggie looked up at her father, her eyes wide. "Papa, what's under here?" Walter thought about Henry Shaw's nervous behavior during the sale. The man's insistence on a quick transaction, his warnings about the back corner, his fear when discussing what the Apache might have left behind. "I don't know," Walter admitted, "but Copper seems to think it's important enough to destroy himself trying to reach." Father and daughter looked at the dog lying beside the mysterious floorboards. Copper's eyes were fixed on the wood with an intensity that hadn't diminished despite his injuries. "We need to open it," Maggie said quietly. "I know. Now, Papa, before whatever's down there gets taken by someone else." Walter nodded slowly. He retrieved the crowbar he'd brought from the wagon and positioned it under the edge of the first suspicious plank. "Stay with Copper," he told his daughter. "If anything dangerous comes out of here, grab him and run." "Papa, promise me Maggie." She hesitated, then nodded. Walter took a deep breath, feeling his heart flutter uncertainly in his chest. Whatever lay beneath these boards had survived for decades, hidden from everyone who passed through this property. It had waded through 3 families' failed attempts to make this land work. It had waded through Henry Shaw's fearful tenure. Now it would wait no longer. The first board came up with less resistance than Walter expected. The nails were loose, barely holding the plank in place. Someone had definitely removed these boards before and replaced them hastily. Beneath the wood, instead of the packed earth foundation, Walter expected he found darkness. "There's empty space down here," he said, his voice tight with disbelief. Maggie grabbed the lantern from the table and brought it closer. The flickering light revealed rough stone walls extending down into shadow. Steps had been carved into one wall, leading into depths that the lantern couldn't illuminate. "It's a chamber," Maggie whispered. "Someone built a room under this house." Copper struggled to his feet, his bandaged paws unsteady. He thrust his head through the opening, whining with excitement, his entire body quivering. This is what I've been trying to show you." Walter removed 3 more boards, widening the opening enough to see clearly. The stone construction below looked ancient, far older than the wooden structure above. The walls showed tool marks from careful craftsmanship, and the steps appeared worn smooth from years of use. "The Apache who lived here," Walter said slowly, "they didn't just build a shack. They built something they wanted to keep hidden, something important enough to conceal beneath the floor." What could be that important? Walter thought about Henry Shaw's trembling hands, about the man's refusal to step onto the property, about the way he'd fled the county rather than reveal what he knew. There's only one way to find out. He positioned himself at the edge of the opening and began to descend. "Papa, your heart." "My heart's been failing for 2 years, Maggie. I'd rather it stop while I'm discovering something than while I'm lying in bed waiting for death." The stone steps were solid beneath his feet. The air grew cooler as he descended, carrying a scent of earth and age, and something metallic he couldn't identify. At the bottom, the chamber opened before him. The space was larger than Walter had imagined, 20 feet long and 15 feet wide, with a ceiling high enough for him to stand upright. The walls showed the same careful stonework as the entrance-fitted blocks that required no mortar to remain stable after what must have been decades or perhaps centuries. But what captured Walter's attention were the wooden crates stacked along the far wall. Someone had arranged them in neat rows, and fresh scrape marks in the dust around them suggested they had been moved recently. Very recently. "Maggie!" Walter called up through the opening, his voice echoing strangely in the underground space. "I need more light, and you need to see this." His daughter descended with the lantern, her gasp audible as the full scope of the chamber came into view. "There must be 24 crates here," she breathed. Walter approached the nearest one. Markings had been burned into the wood symbols that looked like military designations. His hands trembled as he pried off the lid with his pocket knife. Inside, arranged in neat rows, lay silver dollars. More money than Walter had ever seen in one place. More money than he'd earned in his entire life. "Oh my God," Maggie whispered. Walter opened the second crate. More silver. The third crate. The same. As they worked their way through the collection, the scope of the discovery became staggering. Each container held silver coins, but not random collections. These were systematic accumulations organized and stored with the care of someone building a substantial fortune. "Papa, look at the markings." Maggie pointed to the military insignia on the crates. U.S. Cavalry, Fort Bowie, 1876. The date sent a chill down Walter's spine. 1876, 16 years ago. "The Ghost Canyon robbery," he said quietly. Every resident of Arizona Territory knew the story. An Army payroll wagon had vanished while crossing through Apache territory in the summer of 1876. $47,000 in silver coins intended to pay soldiers at Fort Bowie had disappeared without a trace. The Army searched for years. Fortune hunters searched for decades. No one ever found a single coin. Until now. "This is it," Maggie breathed. "The lost payroll. It's been here the whole time, hidden under a shack that everyone called worthless." Walter's mind raced through the implications. This treasure was worth more than every ranch in the county combined, worth more than anything his family had ever owned or could hope to own. And it belonged to him. Legally, legitimately, it belonged to him. He had purchased the property. Whatever lay beneath the surface was part of that purchase. The Army had abandoned their search decades ago. The original thieves, whoever they were long dead. This fortune was his. But as Walter reached for another crate, his boot disturbed something in the dust. He looked down and felt his blood freeze. Footprints. Fresh boot prints in the ancient dust leading from the entrance to the crates and back again. The prints belonged to someone with large feet and distinctively worn heel patterns. Someone had been in this chamber recently. Someone who knew exactly what was hidden here. "Maggie?" Walter's voice was barely a whisper. "We're not the first ones to find this place." His daughter followed his gaze to the footprints. Her face went pale. "Shaw," she said. "Henry Shaw. He knew. That's why he was so nervous. That's why he sold the property so quickly. He couldn't move the treasure alone. Too heavy, too conspicuous." Walter's mind worked through the puzzle. So he sold the land to someone else planning to come back later with help. And now that someone else is you? The sound of Copper's barking echoed down from above. Sharp, aggressive warning. Someone was approaching the property. Walter and Maggie exchanged a look of pure fear. "We need to get out of here," Maggie said. "Now." They scrambled up the stone steps, emerging into the main room, just as a shadow fell across the doorway. A woman stood there silhouetted against the afternoon light. She was young, perhaps late 20s, with dark hair pulled back from a face that carried an expression of practiced concern. "Mr. Brennan," her voice was sweet professional. "My name is Rachel Moreno. I'm a nurse from Tucson. Your daughter sent word that you need medical attention." Maggie stepped forward. "I didn't send for anyone." Rachel's smile didn't waver. "The message came through the telegraph office. Perhaps there was a confusion about who sent it. Either way, I'm here now and I'd like to help if I can." Copper stood between Rachel and the Brennans, his body tense despite his injured paws. A low growl rumbled in his throat. The dog's instincts had never been wrong. But Walter's heart was pounding dangerously, and the possibility of medical help was too valuable to dismiss without consideration. "Come inside, Miss Moreno." Walter placed a restraining hand on Copper's collar. "We can sort out the confusion." As Rachel stepped into the shack, her eyes swept across the room, lingering for just a moment on the disturbed floorboards in the corner. Just a moment, but long enough for Walter to notice. This woman knew something. And whatever she knew, it had brought her to this remote property on the exact day that Walter discovered a fortune hidden beneath his feet. Coincidences like that didn't exist. Copper continued to growl, his mismatched eyes fixed on Rachel with an intensity that spoke louder than any words. She's not who she claims to be. And somewhere outside, beyond the hills that surrounded the property, Henry Shaw was waiting for his spy to report back. The trap was closing, and Walter had just invited the enemy into his home. Rachel Moreno proved to be remarkably helpful over the following days. She examined Walter's heart condition with apparent expertise, prescribing rest and specific herbs that she claimed would strengthen his failing organ. She helped Maggie care for Copper's healing paws, changing bandages with gentle hands and speaking softly to the dog who still growled whenever she approached. She played with young Jimmy when he visited, teaching him card games and listening to his stories with what seemed like genuine interest. And she asked questions. Subtle questions scattered throughout innocent conversations. Questions about the property's history, about what Walter had discovered during his repairs, about why he spent so much time in the back corner of the main room. Walter answered carefully, revealing nothing about the chamber. But on the fourth night of Rachel's residence, something changed. Walter woke in darkness, his heart pounding from a dream he couldn't remember. Something had pulled him from sleep, some sound or instinct that demanded attention. He lay still, listening. Footsteps. Soft, careful moving across the wooden floor. Through slitted eyes, Walter watched Rachel slip out the door. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going and didn't want to be followed. Walter waited until she was gone, then rose silently from his bed. Copper lifted his head, instantly alert. "Stay here, boy. Guard Maggie." The dog's eyes gleamed in the darkness, understanding. Walter followed Rachel's path outside, keeping to the shadows. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like silver coins against black velvet. In the distance, he could see Rachel's silhouette moving toward the rocks east of the property. She stopped at a clearing invisible from the house. As Walter watched from behind a boulder, Rachel knelt and began building something with practiced hands. A signal fire. The flames caught quickly, sending a column of smoke into the night sky. Rachel stood and watched it burn her back to Walter, her posture speaking of satisfaction at a mission accomplished. She was signaling someone who was waiting for confirmation. Henry Shaw. Walter's hands clenched into fists. This woman had infiltrated his home, had tended his failing heart, had smiled at his grandson and helped bandage his dog, all while planning to betray them. He could confront her now, could demand answers at gunpoint, and force her to reveal Shaw's plans. But Rachel might not know everything, and more importantly, revealing his knowledge would alert Shaw that his spy had been discovered. Better to play the fool. Better to let them think their trap remained unsprung. Walter retreated to the house before Rachel returned. When she slipped back inside an hour later, he was apparently asleep, his breathing slow and regular. But his mind was racing. Shaw knew about the treasure. Shaw had sold the property to the most vulnerable buyer he could find, an old man with a failing heart and no resources to protect what he'd purchased. Shaw had sent a spy to confirm the treasure's location and assess the defenses. Everything was falling into place for Shaw's return, which meant Walter had very little time to prepare. In the morning, Walter announced that he needed to visit town for supplies. Rachel offered to accompany him, but he declined, with a smile that hid his churning thoughts. "Stay and rest, Miss Moreno. You've been working too hard caring for all of us. But Mr. Brennan, your heart has survived 62 years of my stubbornness. It'll survive one more wagon ride." He left Copper with instructions that the dog seemed to understand completely. Guard, watch, warn. The ride to town took 3 hours, giving Walter time to think through his options. He had no money to hire protection. The local sheriff was Thomas's friend, unlikely to believe a wild story about hidden treasure and incoming bandits. And even if he could convince someone to help, Shaw's men would likely arrive before any defense could be organized. There was only one person who might believe him. Only one person with the resources to help. Thomas Brennan. His brother's ranch looked exactly as it always did. Pristine. Successful. Everything that Walter's life was not. Thomas met him at the gate, his expression mixing surprise with wariness. "Brother, I didn't expect to see you so soon, ready to admit you made a mistake." "I need your help." Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You need my help, after everything you said, after you walked away from this family to go die in a cursed shack." "I found something, Thomas. Something that changes everything." "Found what? A fortune in termite-eaten wood? A gold mine of rusty nails?" Walter reached into his pocket and pulled out $3 silver. He'd taken them from the chamber, a tiny fraction of the total, but enough to prove his claim. "I found the Ghost Canyon payroll." Thomas stared at the coins. His hand trembled as he reached out to touch them. "That's impossible." "It's hidden under the house, buried in a stone chamber that the Apache built decades ago. Henry Shaw discovered it, but he couldn't move the treasure alone, so he sold me the property planning to come back with help. And now Shaw's coming. He sent a spy ahead to confirm the treasure's still there. I have days at most before he arrives with enough men to take everything." Thomas's expression shifted through a dozen emotions. Disbelief, greed, fear, and finally, something that Walter hadn't seen from his brother in years. Family loyalty. "How many men?" Thomas asked. "I don't know. Enough to overwhelm one old man with a failing heart." "You have Maggie there. And the boy?" "Jimmy visits sometimes. He shouldn't be there when Shaw arrives." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, staring at the silver dollars that represented a fortune beyond imagination. "This treasure," he said finally, "if we protect it, If we fight off Shaw, what then? Walter met his brother's eyes. Then I share it, with everyone who helps defend it, including you. Thomas laughed, but this time there was genuine humor mixed with disbelief. You're offering me a share of a fortune that I told you didn't exist, a fortune hidden under property I called worthless. I'm offering you a chance to be my brother again, to stand beside me instead of above me. Walter's voice cracked with emotion he couldn't hide. Sarah would have wanted us to be family, Thomas, real family. This is my way of making that happen. The silence stretched between them heavy with decades of resentment and missed opportunities. Then Thomas extended his hand. Tell me everything about Shaw's spy, and everything about the chamber. If we're going to fight, we need to know exactly what we're fighting for. Walter gripped his brother's hand with a strength he didn't know he still possessed. For the first time since Sarah's death, he wasn't facing the future alone, but as he began to explain the situation, neither brother knew that Rachel was watching from the road. She had followed Walter despite his instructions, had watched him enter Thomas's ranch, had seen the brothers shake hands in apparent reconciliation, and now she was riding hard toward the eastern hills where Henry Shaw waited with growing impatience for news of his treasure. The timeline had just accelerated. Shaw would be coming sooner than anyone expected, and when he arrived, he would bring enough violence to ensure no one survived to challenge his claim. Rachel's horse thundered across the desert floor, kicking up clouds of dust that marked her desperate path toward the eastern hills. Her mind raced faster than the animal beneath her, calculating the implications of what she had witnessed. Walter Brennan had found allies. The old fool had somehow convinced his brother to help, which meant Shaw's carefully constructed plan was already unraveling. She pushed the horse harder. 3 miles from the property in a canyon hidden from casual observation, Henry Shaw waited with 5 men who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation. They had been camping here for 2 days, growing restless, growing dangerous. Shaw stood when he heard the approaching hoofbeats. His hand moved instinctively to the pistol at his hip. "It's me," Rachel called out before she reached the canyon's mouth. "Don't shoot." She dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, stumbling slightly in her urgency. "What happened?" Shaw grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into flesh. "Why are you here? I told you to wait for my signal." "Plans have changed." Rachel pulled free from his grip, rubbing the marks his fingers had left. "Brennan found the chamber." Shaw's face went pale, then red with fury. "When... days ago, his dog led him right to it. That animal knew exactly where to dig." "The dog," Shaw spat on the ground. "I should have killed that beast when I had the chance." "There's more." Rachel hesitated, knowing the next words would push Shaw beyond rational thought. "Brennan went to his brother today, Thomas Brennan. I followed him, watched them talking on the ranch. They shook hands, Henry. The old man has help now." Shaw's reaction was immediate and violent. He swept his arm across the makeshift table, scattering maps and supplies. The 5 men around him tensed hands, moving toward weapons. "How many men does Thomas have?" "At least a dozen ranch hands, maybe more. And Thomas is friends with Sheriff Tucker." "Tucker," Shaw's voice dripped with venom. "That righteous fool has been looking for an excuse to hang me for years." "What do we do?" Shaw paced the narrow canyon, his boots grinding against stone. The other men watched him silently, waiting for orders, waiting for permission to unleash the violence that simmered beneath their rough exteriors. "We move tonight," Shaw finally said, "before Thomas can organize his men, before the sheriff gets involved." "Tonight?" Rachel's voice carried genuine surprise. "Henry, we're not ready. We don't have the wagons in position. We don't have time." Shaw grabbed Rachel by the shoulders, his face inches from hers. "Every hour we wait gives Brennan another chance to fortify, another chance to call for help. Another chance to take what's mine." "It was never yours, Henry. You just found it." The slap came without warning, snapping Rachel's head to the side. She tasted blood where her lip had split against her teeth. "It became mine the moment I discovered it," Shaw hissed. "I spent 6 months in that rotting shack listening to the wind howl through the walls, eating food that would make a dog sick. I earned that treasure with every miserable day I spent on that cursed land." Rachel touched her bleeding lip but said nothing. She had learned long ago that arguing with Henry Shaw when he was like this only led to more pain. "Get back to the property," Shaw ordered. "Keep Brennan calm. Keep him thinking you're there to help. I need him relaxed off guard when we arrive. And if he suspects," Shaw smiled, and the expression held no warmth at all, "then you make sure he doesn't live long enough to act on those suspicions. Understand?" Rachel understood perfectly. She mounted her horse and rode back toward the property, leaving behind a man whose greed had consumed everything human within him. 4 hours later, as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Walter returned to his property with Thomas riding beside him. They found Maggie waiting on the porch, her face tight with worry, young Jimmy clinging to her hand. "Papa, something's wrong. Rachel left while you were gone. Said she needed to gather herbs from the hills." Walter and Thomas exchanged a glance heavy with meaning. "How long ago, Walter dismounted quickly, his aging body protesting the sudden movement. 3 hours, maybe 4? Maggie's voice trembled. "Copper's been growling ever since she left. He knows something, Papa. He's been trying to tell us." As if summoned by his name, Copper limped through the doorway, his bandaged paws still healing, but his eyes burning with alert intensity. The dog moved directly to Walter's side and pressed against his leg. "Danger. Danger is coming." Thomas surveyed the property with the experienced eye of a man who had protected his own ranch from bandits and thieves for decades. "We need to assume Shaw knows everything now, which means he'll be coming soon." "Tonight?" Maggie's face went pale. "Maybe. Maybe tomorrow at dawn. Either way, we don't have much time." Thomas turned to Walter. "Brother, you need to send Maggie and Jimmy away. If this turns violent, I'm not leaving." Maggie's voice cut through her uncle's words like a blade. "This is my father's property, my inheritance, my fight." "Maggie." "No, Papa, I'm staying." She knelt beside Jimmy, her hands on his small shoulders. "But Jimmy needs to go. He needs to ride to town and bring help." Walter looked at his grandson, 8 years old, brave beyond his years, too young to face what was coming. "Can you do it, son? Can you ride to town alone if you have to?" Jimmy's chin lifted. "I can do it, Grandpa. I won't let you down." "You never could, Jimmy." Walter pulled the boy into a fierce embrace. "You never could." Thomas took charge of preparations with the efficiency of a man accustomed to giving orders. He sent Jimmy toward town with strict instructions to bring Sheriff Tucker and as many armed men as he could find. The boy rode well, and the horse Thomas gave him was fast and sure-footed. "He'll make it," Thomas assured Walter as they watched Jimmy disappear into the distance. "That boy has more courage than men twice his age." "He gets it from his grandmother." Walter's voice was thick with emotion. "Sarah would have been proud of him." There was no time for further sentiment. Thomas began organizing the defense positioning furniture near windows that could serve as cover, checking ammunition supplies, identifying escape routes if everything went wrong. Maggie proved herself invaluable, her mother's training evident in every task. She reinforced the door hinges with spare metal. She calculated sight lines from every window. She loaded weapons with hands that didn't tremble despite the fear in her eyes. And through it all, Copper maintained his vigil, positioned near the corner where the chamber entrance lay hidden beneath hastily replaced floorboards. The dog knew what they were truly protecting, the treasure that had drawn Shaw back, the fortune that could change everything for the Brennan family, if they survived the night. By nightfall, the property had been transformed into a makeshift fortress. Walter sat at the rough wooden table cleaning the rifle he hadn't fired in years. His hands remembered the motions even as his mind wandered through darker territories. "Do you think Shaw will give us a chance to surrender?" he asked his brother. Thomas shook his head slowly. "Men like Shaw don't take chances. We've seen the treasure. We know what he's planning. He can't let us live to tell anyone." "So it's fight or die." "Fight or die," Thomas confirmed. "But Walter, there's something you should know. I sent word to Sheriff Tucker before we left the ranch. Told him everything you told me. Even if Jimmy doesn't make it to town, Tucker will be on his way by morning." Walter looked up from his rifle. "You believed me just like that. I believed the silver dollars you showed me, and I believed the fear in your eyes." Thomas moved to stand beside his brother. "But mostly I believed that you wouldn't lie about something this important. Not to me. Not after everything that's happened between us." The words hung in the air in acknowledgement of decades of distance that neither brother had known how to bridge. "I'm sorry," Walter said quietly. "For all the times I blamed you for my failures. For resenting your success instead of celebrating it. For being too proud to ask for help when I needed it most." Thomas placed a hand on Walter's shoulder. "I'm sorry too. For watching you struggle and doing nothing. For telling myself you deserved whatever hardship came your way. For being so afraid of looking weak that I let my own brother suffer alone. Sarah would have knocked our heads together years ago. She would have, and she would have been right to do it." A sound from outside interrupted their reconciliation. Copper's head snapped toward the door, a low growl building in his chest. Footsteps on the porch. Light and careful. A woman's tread. Rachel stepped through the doorway, her face arranged in an expression of innocent concern. But something was different. Something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Fear, and beneath the fear calculation. "Mr. Brennan, I'm so glad you're back. I was worried when you left so suddenly this morning." Her gaze swept across the room, taking in the barricaded windows, the weapons, the defensive positions. "What's happening here?" Walter rose slowly from his chair. "I could ask you the same thing, Miss Moreno." "I don't understand." "Where did you go this afternoon? And don't say gathering herbs. We both know that's a lie." Rachel's mask slipped for just a moment, just long enough for Walter to see the truth beneath. "I went for a walk. The desert air helps me think." "The desert air? In the direction of the eastern hills?" Walter stepped closer, and Copper moved with him, the dog's growl growing louder. "The same eastern hills where Henry Shaw has been camping with his men for the past 2 days. Rachel's face went pale. Her eyes darted toward the door, calculating distance and odds. "I don't know anyone named Henry Shaw." "Then why is his name carved into the grip of the knife you carry?" Thomas moved to block her escape route. "I noticed it this morning when you were cutting bandages for Copper. Nice piece of work, custom made, with the initials HS right below the blade." Rachel's hand moved toward her hip, but Walter was faster. His rifle came up, not quite pointing at her, but close enough to make his meaning clear. "I wouldn't," he said quietly, "not with my brother and my daughter both armed and watching." Maggie stood near the back window, her own weapon steady in her hands. Her face showed no hesitation, only the fierce determination of a mother protecting everything she loved. Rachel's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of her in a single exhale. "How long have you known?" "Since I followed you to your signal fire 2 nights ago." Walter's voice was calm, almost gentle. "I watched you build it. Watched you wait until the flames caught. Watched you ride back to this house and slip into bed like nothing had happened. Then why didn't you confront me? Why let me stay?" "Because I needed to know how much time we had, and because I hoped against all evidence that you might choose differently when the moment came." Rachel laughed bitterly. "Choose differently? You don't know Henry Shaw. Once you're in his orbit, there is no choosing. There's only surviving." "How long have you been with him?" 3 years. He won me in a card game in Tombstone." She said it without emotion, as if describing the weather. "I was supposed to be a prize. Turns out I'm more useful as a partner. A partner who does what spies on old men. Men with failing hearts, betrays families, who take you in and treat you with kindness. A partner who does whatever it takes to stay alive." Rachel met Walter's eyes without flinching. "You don't understand what Shaw is capable of, the things he's done, the people he's killed to get this close to that treasure." "Tell me." Rachel hesitated, then slowly she began to talk. "Shaw discovered the chamber 6 months ago. He was drunk, stumbling around the house at night, and he fell through a section of floor that had rotted away, landed right in the middle of all that silver. Why didn't he take it then? Because he couldn't move it alone. Thousands of coins, hundreds of pounds of silver. He tried carrying out a few handfuls at a time, but it would have taken years to empty the chamber that way. He needed wagons. He needed men. He needed help. So he sold the property." Rachel nodded. "He found the most vulnerable buyer he could. An old man with no money, no connections, no way to protect what he'd purchased. Shaw figured you'd give up within a month, maybe 2. Then he'd come back, claim squatters' rights, and take everything. But I didn't give up. No, and then your dog found the chamber again, and suddenly Shaw's timeline collapsed." Rachel's voice dropped. "He's coming tonight, Mr. Brennan, with 5 men who've killed for less than loose change. They'll burn this place to the ground, if that's what it takes to get that silver." Walter absorbed this information with a calm that surprised even himself. Perhaps it was the certainty of knowing his enemy. Perhaps it was the peace that came from having his family beside him united for the first time in years. "What about you, Miss Moreno? What happens to you when Shaw arrives?" "I'm supposed to let them in, create a distraction while they take position." Rachel's voice wavered. "And after, when there are no more witnesses, I suppose Shaw will decide I've outlived my usefulness. You don't sound happy about that prospect." "I'm not happy about any of this." Rachel's composure finally cracked. "Do you think I wanted this life? Do you think I dreamed of becoming a spy and a liar and an accomplice to murder? I had plans once. I had hopes. But Shaw took all of that away, one piece at a time, until there was nothing left but survival." Maggie spoke for the first time since Rachel's exposure. "So help us, turn against Shaw. Tell us everything we need to know to stop him." "He'll kill me. He might kill you anyway. At least this way you die on the right side." Rachel stared at Maggie, seeing something in the younger woman's face that she had forgotten existed. Compassion. Understanding. The recognition that people could change, could choose differently, even when every choice seemed impossible. What do you want to know? By midnight, Walter had a complete picture of Shaw's forces and plans. 5 men, all experienced killers. 2 wagons waiting 3 miles away to transport the treasure. An attack planned for the darkest hours before dawn, when defenders would be tired and vulnerable. Shaw's strategy was simple and brutal. Approach from multiple directions. Set fire to the structure. Force the occupants out into the open, where they could be picked off one by one. He doesn't care about the building, Rachel explained. Only the chamber. Stone doesn't burn. The treasure will survive, even if everything above it turns to ash. How do we stop him? Thomas asked. Rachel was silent for a long moment. You don't? Not with the numbers you have. Shaw's men are professionals. They've been doing this for years. You're a rancher, an old farmer, and a woman. No offense. None taken, Maggie said dryly. But you're forgetting something. What? We have what Shaw wants, which means he has to come to us, and the chamber has another exit. Rachel's eyes widened. How do you know about that? Walter reached into his pocket and withdrew the leather-bound journal he had found in the chamber's alcove. The woman who hid the treasure wrote about it, an escape tunnel built by her ancestors leading to rocks about 50 yards from the house. Shaw doesn't know about the tunnel. He only explored the main chamber before the floorboards collapsed and trapped him inside. Rachel's expression shifted from despair to something approaching hope. If you could get to the tunnel before they set the fire, we could escape, circle around behind them, change the odds. Thomas shook his head. It's risky. If Shaw catches us in that tunnel, we're trapped underground with no way out. We're trapped either way, Walter said quietly. At least the tunnel gives us a chance. Copper whined softly, pressing closer to Walter's leg. The dog understood the danger, understood that his master was contemplating a path that might lead to death. But Copper also understood something else, something that his keen senses had been telling him since the moment they arrived at this property. This place was meant to be found. This treasure was meant to be protected, and Walter Brennan was meant to be the one who protected it. The dog had known it from the first moment his paws touched the ground. Now it was time for Walter to believe it too. 2 hours before dawn, Walter made his decision. We stay and fight, he announced to the assembled group, but not the way Shaw expects. Rachel, you're going to help us. Help you how? You're going to let Shaw in just like he planned. You're going to create your distraction, but instead of helping his men take position, you're going to lead them into a trap. Rachel stared at him. You're asking me to betray Henry. He'll kill me. He's going to kill you anyway. You said so yourself. Walter's voice was gentle, but firm. The only question is whether you die helping evil men take what doesn't belong to them, or whether you die standing up for something better. And if we win, if by some miracle we actually stop Shaw, then you get a second chance, a real one. Walter extended his hand. I'm not offering forgiveness, Miss Moreno. What you've done can't be erased, but I am offering you a choice, the kind of choice Shaw took away from you 3 years ago. Rachel looked at Walter's outstretched hand. In his weathered face, she saw something she had almost forgotten existed. Hope. She took his hand. Tell me what you need me to do. The plan was desperate. The odds were terrible, and every person in that room knew that sunrise might find them dead on the desert floor. But they had something Shaw and his men lacked. They had purpose beyond greed. They had bonds stronger than fear. They had a 62-year-old man with a failing heart who refused to stop fighting, and they had a dog who had never been wrong. As the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Walter took his position by the chamber entrance. Thomas guarded the back window with Maggie beside him. Rachel stood near the front door, ready to play her part in the deception. Copper pressed against Walter's leg, his mismatched eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the walls. They're coming, those eyes said. I can hear them. Walter heard them too. The soft crunch of boots on gravel. The whispered commands of men preparing for violence. The click of weapons being readied. Henry Shaw had arrived, and whatever happened next would determine whether Walter's faith in his instincts, his family, and his loyal dog had been justified, or whether the laughter of his family would prove to be prophecy after all. The first shot shattered the window beside Thomas's head at exactly 5:47 in the morning. Glass exploded inward, slicing across his cheek as he dove for cover. Blood ran down his face, but he barely noticed. His rifle was already up, seeking targets in the gray dawn light. They're early, Rachel screamed from her position near the door. Shaw wasn't supposed to attack until... Another shot tore through the wooden wall, missing Maggie by inches. She dropped to the floor and crawled toward her father, her weapon clutched against her chest. "Papa, are you hit?" Walter pressed his back against the wall beside the chamber entrance, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "I'm fine. Stay down. Stay down." Copper crouched beside him, every muscle tensed, a continuous growl rumbling from deep in his chest. The dog's eyes tracked movement outside that human senses couldn't detect. "Brennan?" Shaw's voice cut through the gunfire, sharp and confident. "I know you found my treasure. I know you've been down in that chamber. This doesn't have to end with everyone dead." Walter said nothing. He checked his ammunition. 6 rounds in the rifle. Another 12 in his belt. Not nearly enough. "Send out the women," Shaw continued. "Send them out and I'll let them walk away. This is between us, old man. No reason for your family to die for silver that was never yours." Thomas wiped blood from his face and caught Walter's eye. His expression asked the question without words. Walter shook his head. Shaw was lying. They both knew it. "I'm counting to 10, Brennan. Then we burn you out." Rachel crawled across the floor to Walter's position. Her face was pale, terrified, but her voice held steady. "He means it. Once Shaw starts counting, he doesn't stop." 1? Walter's mind raced through options that didn't exist. 2. Thomas repositioned himself near the back window. He could see at least 3 men out there moving between cover positions. 3. Maggie reached her father's side. "The tunnel, Papa. We need to get to the tunnel." 4. "Not yet. If we run now, they'll catch us in the open." 5. Rachel grabbed Walter's arm. "He's going to burn the house. The tunnel entrance is inside. If the building collapses..." 6. "We'll be trapped underground." Walter understood. "We need a distraction." 7. Copper suddenly bolted toward the door. Walter grabbed for his collar, but missed. 8. "Copper, no..." 9. The dog hit the door at full speed, his injured paws forgotten in the urgency of the moment. The latch gave way and Copper burst into the dawn light, barking with a ferocity that Walter had never heard before. 10. "Burn it down." But Shaw's men hesitated. The border collie was charging directly at them, teeth bared, a gray and white blur of fury that seemed to come from nowhere. "Shoot the dog!" Shaw screamed. "Kill that animal!" A man named Carter raised his rifle. He was Shaw's best shot, a former cavalry marksman who had killed 17 men and never missed a target. He missed Copper? The dog zigged left as Carter's bullet tore through empty air. Copper zagged right as a second shot from another man kicked up dust behind him. "What the hell is wrong with you people? It's just a dog." But it wasn't just a dog. It was 8 years of loyalty given physical form. It was every night spent watching over Walter's sleep. It was every morning greeting that had pulled Walter back from the edge of despair after Sarah died. Copper was buying time, and he was doing it with his life. "Now, Walter shouted. "Everyone to the chamber, now!" Thomas fired 3 rapid shots through the back window, forcing Shaw's men to take cover. Maggie was already pulling up the floorboards, revealing the dark entrance to the chamber below. "Go, go, go!" Rachel dropped through the opening, first landing hard on the stone floor 12 feet below. Maggie followed using the carved steps that Morningstar's ancestors had built generations ago. Thomas kept firing his ammunition, dwindling with each pull of the trigger. "Walter, you need to go. I'll hold them." "Not without you." "Don't be a fool, brother. Someone needs to..." A bullet caught Thomas in the shoulder. He spun sideways, his rifle clattering to the floor as he crashed against the wall. "Thomas!" Walter was at his brother's side in 3 steps, ignoring the bullets that punched through the walls around them. Blood soaked through Thomas's shirt, spreading fast. "It's nothing." Thomas's voice was tight with pain. "Just a scratch." "You're a terrible liar." Walter pulled his brother toward the chamber entrance. "Can you climb down?" "I can do whatever I have to do." Outside, the sounds of chaos intensified, men shouting, Copper barking, and then a sound that made Walter's blood freeze, the dog's yelp of pain. "Copper!" Walter lunged toward the door, but Thomas grabbed his arm with his uninjured hand. "You can't help him, not now. We have to go. He's dying out there, dying for us. And his death means nothing if we don't survive." Thomas's grip tightened. "Honor his sacrifice, Walter. Get to the tunnel. Live." Walter's heart shattered into pieces, but his body obeyed his brother's command, moving toward the chamber entrance, dropping through the opening landing on ancient stone as the world above began to burn. Smoke poured through the floorboards as Shaw's men set fire to the structure. The 4 survivors huddled in the chamber's far corner where the tunnel entrance waited behind stacked crates of silver. The air was already growing thick, hard to breathe. "How much time do we have?" Maggie asked. Minutes. Rachel coughed against the smoke. The floor will collapse soon. When it does, burning debris will fall into the chamber. Walter stared at the ceiling, listening to the roar of flames above. Somewhere up there, Copper lay wounded or dying. The dog who had led them to this treasure. The dog who had saved them all. Move the crates, Walter ordered. We need to reach the tunnel. They worked in desperate silence, shoving aside containers filled with silver coins that clinked and shifted with each movement. Thomas worked one-handed his wounded shoulder, leaving a trail of blood on every crate he touched. The tunnel entrance was narrower than Walter had expected. A man would have to crawl on hands and knees to pass through, and the passage extended into darkness that their single lantern couldn't penetrate. I'll go first. Maggie took the lantern from her father's trembling hands. If there's a collapse or a blocked section, I'll call back. Maggie. There's no time to argue, Papa. She kissed his cheek quickly, then dropped to her knees and disappeared into the tunnel. Rachel went next, then Thomas, Gauze groaning with each movement that jarred his wounded shoulder. Walter paused at the entrance, looking back at the chamber that held a fortune in silver, looking up at the ceiling, where flames now licked through gaps in the collapsing floor. Copper, his loyal friend, his last connection to Sarah. A tear ran down Walter's weathered cheek. Then he entered the tunnel and left the burning building behind. The passage was worse than any of them had imagined. Stone pressed close on all sides, scraping against shoulders and hips with every forward movement. The air grew thick and stale as they crawled deeper, and more than once Walter felt the walls narrow to the point where he wasn't sure his body would fit through. Keep moving, Maggie called from ahead, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. I can feel air. We're getting close. Walter's heart hammered against his ribs. His failing organ, the one the doctor had warned could stop at any moment, it seemed determined to prove that prediction right. Each beat felt like a struggle, each breath a victory against the darkness that pressed in from all sides. Thomas crawled in front of Walter, his injured shoulder, leaving smears of blood on the tunnel floor. The rancher made no sound of complaint, but Walter could see the trembling in his brother's arms, the way his movements were slowing with each passing minute. Thomas, talk to me. I'm fine. The words came through gritted teeth. Just keep moving. You're losing too much blood. Then I'll lose it faster if we stop. Thomas's voice hardened. Move, Walter. That's an order. Despite everything, Walter almost smiled. Even wounded, bleeding, crawling through darkness toward uncertain salvation, his brother couldn't resist giving commands. Some things never changed. Light appeared ahead, faint at first, then growing stronger as the tunnel angled upward toward what Walter prayed was the surface. Maggie emerged first, pulling herself through an opening hidden behind a cluster of large rocks. She gasped the fresh morning air like a drowning woman breaking the surface of a lake. Rachel followed, then Thomas, who collapsed against the rocks the moment he was free of the tunnel's grip. Walter came last, his body screaming with exhaustion, his heart stuttering in his chest. He lay on his back and stared at the sky, watching smoke rise from the burning building 50 yards away. We made it, Maggie breathed. We actually made it. Not yet, Rachel pointed toward the property. Look, Shaw's men had surrounded the burning structure, watching the flames consume the building that Walter had worked so hard to save. But Shaw himself stood apart from the others, his eyes scanning the surrounding terrain with predatory intensity. He knows about the tunnel, Rachel whispered. I didn't tell him, I swear, but he knows. Look at his face. Walter looked, and saw something that made his blood freeze. Shaw was smiling. Fan out. Shaw's voice carried clearly across the distance. They're not inside. The tunnel, remember, they would have used the tunnel. Find them. 5 men began moving systematically across the property, checking every rock formation, every possible hiding place. They were coming directly toward the tunnel exit. Walter pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the protests of his exhausted body. We need to move. Now. Where? Thomas struggled upright, his face gray with blood loss. We're in the open. No cover for half a mile in any direction. The horses. Maggie pointed toward the property boundary where Shaw's men had left their mounts. If we can reach them. We'll never make it. Rachel shook her head. Shaw's men are too close. They'll see us the moment we leave these rocks. Walter's mind raced through options that kept leading to dead ends. Run and be shot, hide and be found, fight and be overwhelmed. Copper would have known what to do. Copper always knew. But Copper was gone. A bark shattered the morning air. Walter's head snapped toward the sound. His heart, his failing, treacherous heart, seemed to stop entirely. Copper stood at the edge of the rock formation, his fur matted with blood, his hind leg dragging uselessly behind him. The dog had crawled from the burning building through the chaos of Shaw's attack, had followed his master's scent across 50 yards of open ground, had found them despite wounds that should have killed him. "Copper," Walter's voice broke on the name. "Oh God, Copper." The dog's tail wagged weakly. His mismatched eyes found Walter's face and held there with an expression that needed no translation. "I found you. I'll always find you." "Shaw's coming." Rachel's voice cut through the moment. "We have seconds, not minutes." Walter looked at his wounded dog, looked at his wounded brother, looked at his daughter and the woman who had betrayed them, and then chosen to stand with them instead. "I'm done running." Maggie grabbed his arm. "Papa, no. There are too many of them. There have always been too many of them. Too many people telling me I was worthless. Too many voices saying I should give up. Too many reasons to surrender." Walter picked up a rock, tested its weight in his hand. "I'm tired of running from fights I can't win. Maybe it's time to stand and see what happens." Thomas pushed himself away from the boulder that had been supporting him. Blood continued to seep from his shoulder, but his eyes burned with something that looked almost like pride. "Then we stand together." He raised his pistol with his uninjured hand. 4 bullets left. Might as well use them. "This is insane." Rachel's voice trembled. "Shaw has 5 armed men. We have a rancher who can barely stand an old man with a failing heart and a woman who's never shot anyone in her life." "Then you should probably learn fast." Maggie handed Rachel the rifle she'd been carrying. "Point and pull the trigger. Try not to hit any of us." Rachel stared at the weapon in her hand. 3 years of surviving by deception, by betrayal, by doing whatever Shaw demanded. 3 years of being a victim, and a tool, and a thing to be used. She had never held a gun with the intention of fighting back. "How did it feel?" she asked suddenly. "When you decided to stop running?" Walter met her eyes. "Terrifying, and free." Rachel's grip tightened on the rifle. "Then I guess it's time I felt that too." Shaw's men reached the rock formation at 6:23 in the morning. They came from 3 directions, weapons raised, confident in their numbers and their experience. Carter led the approach from the east, his rifle already tracking toward the cluster of boulders where he expected to find cowering survivors. Instead, he found Walter Brennan standing in plain view, arms crossed, face calm. "Morning," Walter said. "Nice day for a fight." Carter hesitated. Something about the old man's posture made him uneasy. This wasn't how cornered prey behaved. "Shaw?" Carter called over his shoulder. "I found them, but something's wrong." Henry Shaw approached slowly, his eyes never leaving Walter's face. The smile from earlier had faded, replaced by an expression of wary calculation. "Mr. Brennan, you're more resilient than I expected." "You're more predictable than I hoped." Shaw laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Predictable, I've taken everything from you, old man. Your property is burning. Your treasure is exposed. And in a few minutes, you and everyone you love will be dead." "Maybe." Walter didn't move. "Or maybe you've made the same mistake everyone else makes when they look at me." "What mistake is that? Assuming that because something looks worthless, it has no value." Walter's voice hardened. "I spent my whole life being underestimated, Shaw, by my family, by my neighbors, by everyone who thought they knew what I was worth. But I'm still standing, and the people who counted me out are the ones who keep losing." Shaw's patience snapped. "Kill him. Kill all of them. We'll dig the treasure out of the ashes." Carter raised his rifle. A shot rang out from behind the boulders. The bullet caught Carter in the chest, and he dropped without a sound. "Rachel." Shaw's face contorted with shock and rage as his spy stepped into view, rifle smoking in her hands. "You traitorous—" "I'm not your property anymore, Henry." Rachel's voice shook, but her aim held steady. "I'm not your spy. I'm not your tool. I'm done doing terrible things for a man who would have killed me the moment I stopped being useful." Shaw's remaining men hesitated, confused by the sudden shift. Their leader's lover had just shot one of their own. The old man they'd been told would be easy prey stood unafraid. Nothing was happening the way they'd expected. In that moment of hesitation, Thomas fired. His bullet caught another of Shaw's men in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying. Maggie charged from cover, tackling a third man before he could react. Chaos erupted among the boulders. Walter moved faster than his 62-year-old body should have allowed. He grabbed a fallen rifle and swung it like a club, catching a 4th man across the temple. The man dropped unconscious before he hit the ground. Copper launched himself at the 5th man despite his wounds. The dog's teeth found flesh, and the man screamed as he went down under 30 pounds of wounded but furious border collie. Shaw watched his carefully planned attack collapse in seconds. 4 of his 5 men down or incapacitated. His spy turned traitor, his treasure buried under a burning building that he no longer controlled. He did the only thing a coward does when cornered. He grabbed Rachel from behind and pressed his pistol against her head. Enough! Everyone froze. Shaw backed away from the conflict, dragging Rachel with him. His eyes were wild, desperate, the eyes of a man watching everything he'd schemed for slip through his fingers. Nobody moves. Nobody follows. His voice cracked with fury. I'll kill her. You know I will. Walter lowered his weapon slowly. Let her go, Shaw. This is over. It's not over until I say it's over. Shaw's grip tightened on Rachel's arm. 3 years I've planned this. 3 years I've waited for someone stupid enough to buy that cursed land and too weak to protect it. You were supposed to be the perfect victim, Brennan. Old, sick, alone. I was never alone? Your dog? Shaw laughed bitterly. Your family who laughed at you. The brother who let you struggle for decades without lifting a finger. All of them. Walter took a step forward. The dog who led me to the treasure. The family who laughed but came when I needed them. The brother who finally chose to stand beside me. Another step. Even the spy you sent to betray me. They're all part of why I'm still standing and you're the one running away. Stay back. You don't understand Shaw. You never did. Walter kept walking, his eyes locked on the desperate man before him. Worth isn't determined by what others think. It's determined by what you choose to see. You looked at me and saw a worthless old fool. I looked at myself and saw someone worth fighting for. Shaw's hand trembled. The pistol wavered between Rachel's head and Walter's approaching figure. I'll kill you both. I swear I will. Maybe. Walter stopped 3 feet from Shaw's position. But you won't get the treasure, and you won't get away. And when you're standing on the gallows for murder, you'll know that a worthless old man and a beat-up dog defeated you. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Rachel acted. She drove her elbow backward into Shaw's ribs with all the force her body could generate. The impact wasn't enough to incapacitate him, but it broke his grip for just a moment, just long enough for her to drop to the ground, just long enough for Copper, wounded and bleeding and barely able to stand, to launch himself at Shaw's gun hand. The dog's teeth closed around Shaw's wrist. Bone crunched. Shaw screamed and dropped the pistol as Copper's weight dragged his arm downward. Walter moved without thinking. His fist connected with Shaw's jaw in a punch that carried 62 years of being underestimated behind it. Shaw's head snapped back and he crumpled to the ground beside his fallen weapon. Copper collapsed a moment later, his strength finally exhausted. Walter dropped to his knees beside his dog, gathering the blood-soaked animal into his arms. You did it, boy. You saved us all. Copper's tail moved weakly. His mismatched eyes found Walter's face one more time. I told you to trust me. Then the dog's eyes closed. Walter held Copper against his chest and wept, surrounded by the family that had finally come together on land that everyone had called worthless beside a treasure that his faithful companion had led him to find. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke through Walter's grief. He looked up to see riders cresting the hill from the west. A dozen men at least, led by a figure in a sheriff's badge that caught the morning light. Beside the sheriff, barely staying in his saddle, rode young Jimmy Colton. Grandpa, the boy's voice carried across the distance. Grandpa, I brought help, I did it. Maggie pulled her son from his horse the moment the riders reached them, holding him so tightly, Phil, that Jimmy squeaked in protest. You're hurting me, Mama. Good. You scared me half to death. But she was laughing and crying at the same time, her face buried in her son's hair. You wonderful, brave, terrifying boy. Sheriff Tucker took in the scene with the experienced eye of a lawman who had seen too much in his years. The burning building, the wounded and unconscious men scattered among the rocks, Thomas Brennan bleeding from a shoulder wound, Henry Shaw groaning on the ground with a broken wrist, and Walter Brennan sitting in the dust cradling a wounded dog against his chest. Well, Tucker said slowly, looks like I missed quite a party. Thomas managed a weak laugh. You're late, Daniel. Traffic. Tucker dismounted and approached Shaw's prone form. Henry Shaw, I've been wanting to have a conversation with you for about 3 years now. Something about a murdered partner in Tombstone. Shaw's eyes went wide. I don't know what you're... Save it for the judge. Tucker gestured to his deputies. Get these men secured, and someone find a doctor for the wounded. His gaze fell on Copper, including that dog. Any animal brave enough to take on armed men deserves proper medical attention. Walter looked up, with hope flickering in his exhausted eyes. He's alive. For now. Tucker knelt beside Walter and examined Copper with gentle hands. Bullets went through clean. Lost a lot of blood, but I've seen dogs survive worse. He met Walter's eyes. That's one hell of an animal you've got there, Mr. Brennan. I know. Walter's voice broke. I've always known. As the sun climbed higher over the Arizona desert, the chaos of the morning slowly transformed into order. Tucker's men secured Shaw and his surviving companions for transport to the territorial jail. The burning building collapsed in on itself, but the stone chamber beneath remained intact, the treasure safe within its ancient walls. A doctor arrived from town and set to work on Thomas's shoulder. The rancher bore the treatment stoically, though he gripped his brother's hand throughout the procedure. Guess I should have listened to you years ago, Thomas said through gritted teeth as the doctor probed his wound. About the property, about everything. You listened when it mattered. Walter squeezed his brother's hand. That's what counts. And Copper, against all odds, held on. The veterinarian who examined him said the dog should have died 3 times over. The bullet wounds, the blood loss, the exhaustion of following his master through a desperate escape and then fighting despite injuries that would have stopped most animals cold. Some dogs don't know when to quit, the vet said, shaking his head in amazement. This one's got more fight in him than a whole pack of wolves. Walter sat beside Copper throughout the examination, his hand resting on the dog's heaving side. He's got more fight in him than most people, Walter said quietly, including me. Copper's tail moved weakly at the sound of his master's voice. Still here, still fighting, just like you taught me. By noon, the immediate crisis had passed, but the questions were just beginning. Tucker pulled Walter aside, his expression mixing curiosity with official concern. Mr. Brennan, I need you to tell me exactly what's in that chamber under your property. My men are reporting crates, a lot of crates. Walter considered his options. Lying to the sheriff seemed like a poor way to repay the man who had saved their lives, and the truth would come out eventually regardless. Silver, he said simply. Army payroll from 1876, the Ghost Canyon robbery. Tucker's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. The Ghost Canyon payroll that's been missing for 16 years. Not missing, hidden, by the Apache family who built this place originally. And Shaw knew about it. Discovered it 6 months ago, sold me the property planning to come back and take it by force. Walter gestured at the smoldering ruins. You can see how that worked out for him. Tucker was silent for a long moment, processing implications that extended far beyond a single property dispute. That treasure is worth a fortune, he finally said. The Army's going to want answers. Fortune hunters are going to come out of every corner of the territory, and lawyers, he shook his head. God help you when the lawyers get involved. Let them come. Walter's voice carried a certainty that surprised even himself. I bought this property legally. Whatever's under it belongs to me, and I've got a family and a dog who've already proven they'll fight to protect what's ours. Tucker studied Walter's face. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. I believe you, Mr. Brennan, and for what it's worth, I think you've earned whatever good fortune comes your way. He extended his hand. Your wife Sarah was a good woman. Best friend my Emily ever had. She'd be proud of what you did here today. Walter gripped the sheriff's hand. I hope so. I've spent too many years disappointing her memory. Maybe now I can finally start making up for it. As Tucker moved away to coordinate the ongoing cleanup, Walter found himself standing alone amid the ruins of his dream. The shack was gone. The building he had planned to repair, the structure that was supposed to prove everyone wrong about his judgment, had been reduced to ashes and charred timber. But the chamber remained. The treasure remained. His family remained. And Copper, his loyal friend, his connection to Sarah, his guide through the darkness, still breathed. Walter had lost a building. He had gained something far more valuable. He had gained proof that he was worth fighting for, that the broken things, the dismissed things, the worthless things that everyone else overlooked sometimes turned out to be the most valuable of all. Maggie found him standing there as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Papa? She touched his arm gently. You should rest. The doctor says your heart... My heart has survived more today than it has in years. Walter turned to face his daughter. I'm fine, Maggie. Better than fine. Uncle Thomas wants to talk to you. Something about rebuilding. Walter looked toward where his brother sat, shoulder-bandaged, face pale but animated as he gestured and gave orders to men who had once worked only for him. Rebuilding what? Everything. Maggie smiled. He says if you're going to be the richest man in the county, you might as well live in a proper house. He's offering his workers his materials, his expertise. She paused. His apology, Papa? He's offering to help make things right. Walter felt something shift in his chest. Not his failing heart this time. Something deeper. something that had been broken for years and was finally beginning to heal. "Tell him I accept," Walter said. "All of it." As he walked toward his brother toward reconciliation and rebuilding and a future he had never dared to imagine, Walter passed the spot where Copper lay resting under a makeshift shade. The dog's eyes opened as his master approached. That tail, that faithful tail, wagged despite everything. "We did it," those mismatched eyes seemed to say. "We proved them all wrong." Walter knelt beside his dog one more time. "Yes, we did, boy." His voice was thick with emotion. "Yes, we did." And somewhere above them, carried on the desert wind, Walter could almost hear Sarah laughing with joy. 3 days after the battle, the army arrived. Captain James Morrison rode onto Walter's property at exactly 9:15 in the morning, leading a column of 12 soldiers and 3 men in civilian clothes who carried the unmistakable bearing of government lawyers. Their horses kicked up dust that settled on the makeshift camp Thomas's men had established near the ruins of the burned building. Walter watched them approach from his position beside Copper's recovery bed. The dog had survived surgery, though the veterinarian warned that he might never walk properly again. That warning had proven premature. By the second day, Copper was hobbling around the camp. By the third, he was following Walter everywhere, limping but determined. "Mr. Walter Brennan?" Captain Morrison dismounted with military precision. "That's me. I'm here to investigate the recovery of United States Army property, specifically a payroll shipment that went missing 16 years ago." Morrison's voice carried the flat tone of a man following orders he didn't particularly enjoy. "I'll need to examine the contents of the underground chamber on your property." Walter rose slowly, his hand resting on Copper's head. "The chamber is on my land. Land I purchased legally. Whatever's inside belongs to me." "That's for the lawyers to determine." Morrison gestured toward the civilian men. "These gentlemen represent the Army's interests in this matter. They'll need to conduct a full inventory and assessment." And if I refuse, Morrison's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been respect. "Then I have orders to secure the property and conduct the investigation regardless of your cooperation. I'd prefer not to do that, Mr. Brennan. By all accounts, you've been through enough already." Thomas appeared at Walter's side, his wounded shoulder bound tightly against his chest. "Captain, my brother has cooperated fully with Sheriff Tucker's investigation into Henry Shaw's crimes. He's answered every question, provided every document. What more do you need?" "The Army needs to verify that the recovered silver matches the original payroll manifest." Morrison pulled a folded document from his jacket. "We also need to establish chain of custody and determine whether any parties have valid claims to the property." Valid claims. Maggie's voice cut through the conversation as she emerged from behind her father. "My father bought this land legally. He found the treasure through his own efforts. What possible claim could anyone else have?" Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, the original theft was committed against the United States government. Some in Washington believe the property should be returned to federal custody regardless of how it was subsequently discovered." "Some in Washington." Walter's voice hardened. "Not you." Morrison was silent for a long moment. "My orders are clear, Mr. Brennan, but between us, I've read the reports. I know what you and your family did to protect this treasure from Shaw and his men. That counts for something in my book." "Does it count enough to let me keep what's mine?" "That's not my decision to make." Morrison signaled his men forward. "The lawyers will conduct their assessment. The investigation will take as long as it takes. In the meantime, I'd appreciate your cooperation." Walter looked at his brother, at his daughter, at the dog who had led him to this moment. Then he stepped aside. "Search all you want, Captain. I've got nothing to hide." The investigation stretched across 5 days that felt like 5 years. The Army lawyers crawled through every corner of the chamber, counting coins, examining crates, taking meticulous notes that filled dozens of pages. They interviewed everyone involved in the discovery and defense of the treasure, including Rachel Moreno, who had been held at the county jail pending her own legal proceedings. By the morning of the 4th day, Walter's patience had worn thin. "How much longer, he demanded of the lead lawyer, a thin man named Henderson, who had barely spoken 3 words to anyone since arriving. Henderson looked up from his notes with an expression of practiced neutrality. "As long as necessary, Mr. Brennan. The government takes these matters seriously." The government, the same government that abandoned this search 16 years ago, that declared the payroll lost and moved on. Circumstances have changed. Circumstances. Walter stepped closer, and something in his face made Henderson lean back. Let me tell you about circumstances. My dog nearly died finding that treasure. My brother took a bullet protecting it. My grandson rode alone through dangerous territory to bring help. And now you're telling me the government wants to take it all because circumstances have changed. Mr. Brennan, my wife died believing I was a failure. My family laughed at me for buying this land. I've spent 62 years proving everyone right about how worthless I am. Walter's voice cracked with emotion he couldn't control. This treasure was supposed to change that. It was supposed to mean something. And now you're telling me the government might just take it away. Henderson set down his pen. For the first time since arriving, something human flickered across his face. Mr. Brennan, I'm not your enemy. I'm doing a job following procedures that exist for good reasons. But I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've seen how these cases usually go. How do they go? The government rarely wins when the facts are this clear. You purchased the property legally. The Army abandoned its search decades ago. Under territorial law, abandoned property found on legally owned land belongs to the landowner. Henderson glanced around to ensure no one else was listening. Between us, I think you're going to keep your treasure, but I can't say that officially until the investigation is complete. Walter felt something loosen in his chest. Not relief exactly, but hope. Real hope for the first time since the soldiers had arrived. How much longer? 2 days, maybe 3. Henderson returned to his notes. I suggest you use that time to consider what you're going to do with $53,000 in silver. That kind of money changes people, Mr. Brennan, not always for the better. The warning lingered in Walter's mind long after Henderson had returned to his work. On the 5th day, the lawyers called a meeting. Everyone gathered in the large tent that Thomas had erected near the property. Walter sat at a rough wooden table with his brother on one side and Maggie on the other. Jimmy had been sent to school despite his protest, and Copper lay at Walter's feet, his bandaged body a testament to everything they had survived. Captain Morrison stood at the head of the table, Henderson and the other lawyers arranged behind him, like a jury preparing to deliver a verdict. After a thorough investigation, Morrison began, his voice formal and measured, the United States Army has reached a conclusion regarding the Ghost Canyon payroll. Walter's heart pounded against his ribs. Beside him, he felt Maggie grip his arm. The silver recovered from the chamber on this property has been positively identified as the missing 1876 payroll shipment. Current value adjusted for market changes since the original loss is estimated at $53,417. $53,000. Walter had known the general amount, but hearing the exact figure spoken aloud made it suddenly terrifyingly real. Furthermore, Morrison continued, after reviewing territorial law, federal precedent, and the specific circumstances of this case, the Army has determined that Mr. Walter Brennan holds legal claim to the recovered property. Walter couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what he was hearing. The treasure is mine. The treasure is yours, Mr. Brennan. Morrison's formal demeanor cracked slightly, allowing a genuine smile to emerge. Congratulations, you're now one of the wealthiest men in Arizona Territory. Thomas let out a whoop that startled everyone in the tent. Maggie burst into tears and threw her arms around her father. Even the lawyers smiled their professional detachment, giving way to the human satisfaction of delivering good news. But Walter sat frozen, staring at Captain Morrison as if the man had spoken in a foreign language. I don't understand. The government just walks away. Henderson stepped forward. The Army made its choice 16 years ago when it abandoned the search. You made your choice when you bought property everyone called worthless and refused to give up on it. The law is clear about which choice carries more weight. Besides, Morrison added, the Army has enough battles to fight without waging war on 62-year-old ranchers who've already beaten armed bandits and protected federal property at risk of their own lives. Washington may be full of fools, but even fools know when they're outmatched. Copper raised his head and barked once as if adding his own commentary to the verdict. Walter looked down at his dog, at this loyal creature who had started everything by refusing to stop digging at a corner of floor that looked exactly like every other corner. Thank you, Walter said quietly. But he wasn't speaking to Morrison or the lawyers. He was speaking to Copper, to Sarah's memory, to whatever force of fate or providence had led him to buy property that everyone else had dismissed as worthless. The treasure was his. The future was his. Now he just had to figure out what to do with both. The Army departed the following morning, leaving behind a changed landscape and a changed man. Word of Walter's fortune spread faster than any official announcement could have managed. By noon, visitors began arriving. Neighbors who had never acknowledged his existence. Business owners from town offering goods and services. strangers with investment opportunities and sob stories and promises of friendship that hadn't existed a week ago. Thomas handled most of them with the practiced skill of a successful rancher accustomed to opportunist. But one visitor demanded Walter's personal attention. Rachel Moreno arrived at 2:30 in the afternoon, escorted by Sheriff Tucker and 2 deputies. She looked different than Walter remembered. Smaller somehow. The confident spy who had infiltrated his home had been replaced by a woman who seemed uncertain of her place in the world. "She wanted to see you before the trial," Tucker explained. "Said she has something to say that couldn't wait." Walter studied Rachel's face, searching for any trace of the deception that had nearly cost them everything. He found only exhaustion and something that might have been remorse. "Leave us." "Walter, I said leave us. She can't hurt me now." Tucker hesitated, then nodded to his deputies. They withdrew to the edge of the property, close enough to intervene, but far enough to give the conversation privacy. Rachel remained standing, her hands clasped in front of her like a penitent before a priest. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for seeing me. What do you want, Miss Moreno, to apologize and to explain?" She took a shaky breath. "I know neither will change what I did, but I need you to understand why. You already told me. Shaw won you in a card game. You did what you had to do to survive. That's the easy version," Rachel's voice dropped. "The truth is harder." Walter waited. "I was 17 when Shaw found me, working in a saloon in Tombstone, serving drinks to men who saw me as furniture at best. Shaw was charming then, handsome. He promised me a life beyond pouring whiskey and dodging grabbing hands. And you believed him." "I wanted to believe him. There's a difference." Rachel's eyes met Walter's. "By the time I understood what he really was, it was too late. I'd seen too much. Done too much. He owned me more completely than any card game could accomplish. So you became his spy, his tool for deceiving people like me." "Yes." The word came out barely above a whisper. "I told myself it was survival. Told myself the people I betrayed would have done the same in my position, but sitting in that jail cell knowing what almost happened because of me." She trailed off, tears streaming down her face. "Your grandson could have died, Mr. Brennan. Your brother, your daughter, all because I was too afraid to choose differently." Walter was silent for a long moment, processing not just her words, but the emotion behind them. He had seen genuine remorse before, and he had seen its convincing imitation. This felt like the real thing. "What do you want from me, Miss Moreno? Forgiveness?" "I don't deserve forgiveness. I know that." Rachel wiped her tears with bound hands. "What I want is for you to understand that the person who stood with you at the end wasn't an act. When I picked up that rifle and shot Shaw's man, I wasn't pretending. I was choosing. For the first time in 3 years, I was choosing who I wanted to be instead of who Shaw told me to be." "And who do you want to be?" "Someone better, someone who helps instead of hurts." Rachel's voice strengthened. "The sheriff says my testimony will help convict Shaw, that I might get a lighter sentence if I cooperate fully. But even if I spend years in prison, I'll spend them knowing I finally did something right." Walter considered her words carefully. He thought about Sarah, who had always believed in second chances. He thought about his own years of failure and the redemption that had found him when he least expected it. "When does your trial start?" "Next month. The prosecutor says Shaw's trial will come first." "I'll be there." Walter surprised himself with the words. "At both trials, to testify about what Shaw did and about what you did to help stop him." Rachel stared at him in disbelief. "You'd speak for me after everything. You made a choice at the end, the hardest choice of your life. That deserves to be acknowledged." Walter paused. "I'm not offering forgiveness, Miss Moreno. That has to come from somewhere else. But I am offering truth. And sometimes truth is enough to build a second chance on." Rachel broke down completely, then sobbing with a release that seemed to drain years of fear and guilt from her body. Tucker's deputies moved forward instinctively, but Walter waved them back. "Let her be. She's just learning what it feels like to stop running." The sheriff escorted Rachel away an hour later, but something had shifted in Walter during their conversation. A weight he hadn't realized he was carrying seemed lighter now. Perhaps forgiveness wasn't just for the forgiven. Perhaps it freed the forgiver too. Henry Shaw's trial began 3 weeks after the army departed. The courtroom was packed with spectators from across the territory, drawn by stories of hidden treasure, dramatic rescues, and a 62-year-old man who had defeated armed bandits with the help of his wounded dog. Newspapers had covered every detail of the case, turning Walter into something of a folk hero. He hated every moment of it. "You look uncomfortable," Thomas observed as they waited for the proceedings to begin. "I look like a circus attraction." Walter tugged at the collar of his new shirt purchased specifically for the trial. "These people aren't here for justice, they're here for entertainment." "Maybe, but entertainment or not, they're going to see Shaw get what he deserves." The trial itself was almost anticlimactic. Shaw's lawyers attempted to paint him as a desperate man driven to extreme measures by poverty and bad luck. The prosecutor demolished that narrative within hours, presenting evidence of Shaw's previous crimes, including the murder of his partner in Tombstone that Tucker had suspected for years. Rachel's testimony was particularly devastating. She described Shaw's operations in clinical detail, revealing a pattern of manipulation, theft, and violence that stretched back nearly a decade. Her voice never wavered, even when Shaw's cold eyes fixed on her from across the courtroom. Walter took the stand on the fourth day. "Mr. Brennan," the prosecutor began, "can you describe the events of the morning when Shaw and his men attacked your property?" Walter told the story simply and directly. The early morning assault, the burning building, Copper's heroic distraction, the escape through the tunnel, the final confrontation among the rocks. "And throughout this ordeal, you were how old?" 62 years old, with a heart condition that my doctor says could stop at any moment. "Yet you chose to fight rather than surrender." "I chose to protect what was mine, what my family had helped me build." Walter's gaze swept across the courtroom, finding Maggie and Thomas in the gallery, finding young Jimmy sitting straight and proud between them. "Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds say you'll lose." No further questions. Shaw's lawyer approached with a confidence that seemed forced. "Mr. Brennan, isn't it true that you refused multiple opportunities to peacefully resolve this situation?" "I refused to hand over my property to a man who intended to murder me and my family. If that's what you mean by peaceful resolution, then yes." "My client offered to let you and your family leave unharmed." "Your client is a liar." Walter's voice hardened. "He came to my property with 5 armed men. He set fire to my home. He shot my brother and wounded my dog. Whatever he offered was a trap, and we both know it." "That's speculation." "It's experience. I've dealt with liars my whole life. I know what they look like. I know what they sound like." Walter leaned forward. "Your client is sitting in this courtroom because he thought I was too old, too weak, and too foolish to stop him. He was wrong about all 3. The courtroom erupted in murmurs and scattered applause. The judge called for order, but the damage to Shaw's defense was done. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, armed robbery, conspiracy, assault. When the sentence was read, believed to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, Shaw's mask of arrogance finally cracked. He screamed threats and curses as the bailiffs dragged him from the courtroom, his eyes finding Walter one last time. "This isn't over, Brennan. You hear me? This isn't over." But it was over. For Shaw, it was over completely. Walter walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunlight, surrounded by his family reporters shouting questions he had no intention of answering. Maggie squeezed his arm. "You did it, Papa. It's finally finished." Not quite. Walter looked toward the distant hills, toward the property where his new house was already taking shape. "There's still one more thing I need to do." The journey to Morningstar's resting place took most of the following day. Walter had found the location described in her journal, a small clearing in the hills above his property where the Apache woman had asked to be buried. The years had overgrown the site, but the marker stones remained arranged in a pattern that spoke of love and respect. He came alone except for Copper, who limped faithfully beside him, despite the difficult terrain. "I know you can't hear me," Walter said, kneeling beside the ancient grave. "And I know words don't change anything, but I need to say them anyway." Copper settled at his side, his mismatched eyes watching Walter's face with the understanding that had always set him apart from ordinary dogs. "I found your treasure. Your family's treasure. The silver your father hid to protect your people." Walter pulled the leather journal from his pocket. "I read your words. I know why you kept it hidden. I know what it meant to you." The wind stirred through the clearing, carrying the scent of sage and dust and something older than human memory. "I'm going to use the money. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but I'm also going to remember where it came from, what it cost, the people who suffered so that silver would be there for me to find." He placed the journal on the grave marker, adding his own small stone to the arrangement that Morningstar's loved ones had created generations ago. "Your story won't be forgotten. I'll make sure of that. And if there's anything left after I'm gone, any part of the fortune that my family doesn't need, it'll go to helping people like you, people who get overlooked, people who get dismissed as worthless by everyone who can't see their value." Copper pressed closer, his warmth a comfort against the strange weight of the moment. "Rest well, Morningstar, and thank you for hiding the treasure, for keeping it safe, for waiting until someone came along who needed it enough to find it." Walter rose slowly, his aging body protesting the movement, but his heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. He had made his peace with the past. Now it was time to build a future. Construction on the new house proceeded faster than anyone had expected. Thomas threw himself into the project with an energy that seemed to grow from his own need for redemption. He hired the best workers, sourced the finest materials, and supervised every detail with the same attention he gave to running his own ranch. "You don't have to do all this," Walter told him one evening as they watched the walls rise against the sunset. "A simple house would be fine." "A simple house wouldn't be worthy of what you accomplished." Thomas's voice carried an emotion that Walter had rarely heard from his younger brother. "All those years I looked down on you. All those years I thought I was the successful one. And in the end, you're the one who found the fortune. You're the one who defended it. You're the one who proved that worth isn't measured by what others think." "I got lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it." Thomas turned to face his brother. "You believed in something everyone else dismissed. You trusted your instincts when your instincts were all you had. That's not luck, Walter. That's courage." Walter felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I couldn't have done it without you, without Maggie, without Jimmy." He paused. "Without Copper." At the sound of his name, the border collie limped over and pressed against Walter's leg. The dog's recovery had continued better than anyone expected, though he would always walk with a distinctive gait from his wounds. "He's a remarkable animal," Thomas admitted. "I've had dogs my whole life, but I've never seen anything like him. He was Sarah's final gift to me." Walter stroked the gray-flecked fur between Copper's ears. "She told me he would listen for both of us when she was gone. I didn't understand what she meant until now." "What did she mean?" Walter smiled. "That sometimes the most important messages come from the ones who can't speak. You just have to be quiet enough to hear them." As the house neared completion, visitors continued to arrive at the property. Some came seeking investment opportunities. Others came hoping for charity. A few came simply to meet the man whose story had captured the territory's imagination. Walter received them all, with varying degrees of patience depending on their intentions. The opportunists he dismissed quickly. The genuine cases of need he helped where he could, drawing from a fund he had established specifically for that purpose. One visitor, however, demanded special attention. The representative from the Phoenix Historical Society arrived 6 weeks after the trial, carrying documents and proposals that would occupy Walter's attention for the rest of the afternoon. "Mr. Brennan, we'd like to discuss the possibility of preserving Morningstar's journal and other artifacts from the chamber. Preserving house, professionally archived, properly protected, available for scholars and historians who want to understand what really happened during that period." Walter thought about the leather journal now resting on Morningstar's grave, about the story it contained, about the woman who had written it, and the family who had sacrificed everything to protect what they had found. "The journal stays where it is, but I have copies, detailed copies that I made before returning the original to its rightful place." He met the historian's eyes. "Those copies, along with any artifacts my family doesn't need, can go to your society, on one condition." "Name it." Morningstar's story gets told, not as a footnote, not as background detail. Her story front and center alongside everything else. The treasure means nothing without understanding the people who protected it. The historian nodded slowly. "That's exactly what we had in mind, Mr. Brennan. History is more than dates and dollar amounts. It's the people who lived through it." "Then we have a deal." They shook hands, and Walter felt another piece of the puzzle fall into place. The treasure was more than money. It was legacy, and legacy properly tended could change the world long after the silver was spent. Jimmy's school visit brought unexpected joy to a month that had been filled with legal proceedings and construction chaos. The 8-year-old burst through the door of the nearly completed house, his face flushed with excitement that made him seem even younger. Grandpa, you have to come see." Walter looked up from the ledger he had been reviewing, grateful for the interruption. "See what? The kids at school made something for you, for us, for everybody who helped with the treasure." Maggie followed her son inside her expression, mixing amusement with pride. "The teacher organized a project. The whole class participated." Walter allowed Jimmy to drag him outside to where a wagon waited with a canvas-covered object in the back. The boy pulled away the covering with dramatic flourish, revealing a handmade wooden sign painted in bright colors. "Copper's Corner, Walter read aloud. The words were surrounded by childish drawings of dogs' houses and silver coins. Beneath the main text, in smaller letters, where every treasure is worth finding. It's for the new house, Jimmy explained eagerly. So everyone knows what this place is called. The teacher said every important place needs a name, and Copper's Corner is the most important place in the whole territory. Walter stared at the sign at the hours of work that dozens of children had contributed, his vision blurred with tears he didn't try to hide. It's perfect, Jimmy. Absolutely perfect. Do you think Copper will like it? As if summoned by his name, the border collie appeared at Walter's side. He sniffed the sign curiously, then looked up at Walter with an expression that needed no translation. Not bad at all. I think he approves, Walter said. Jimmy threw his arms around his grandfather's waist. I'm so glad you didn't give up, Grandpa. Everyone at school knows about you now. They know about the treasure and the bad guys and how you fought them even though you were old and your heart was sick. They know all that. They know everything, and they know Copper is the best dog in the world because he found the secret room when nobody else could. Walter hugged his grandson tightly. He is the best dog in the world, and you're the bravest boy. Riding all the way to town by yourself to bring help. I wasn't scared, Jimmy said. Then more quietly, maybe a little scared, but I kept going anyway. That's what courage is, son. Not the absence of fear, the decision to keep going despite it. They hung the sign together that afternoon, positioning it at the entrance to the property where everyone approaching could see it clearly. Copper's Corner. The name felt right. It honored the dog who had started everything with his stubborn refusal to stop digging. It honored the journey that had transformed Walter from a failure into someone his family could respect. And it honored Sarah, whose final gift had changed everything. As the sun set on another day in Arizona territory, Walter sat on the porch of his new house with Copper at his feet and his family gathered around him. Thomas had brought wine from his private collection. Maggie had prepared a meal that reminded Walter of dinners Sarah used to make. Jimmy had fallen asleep in his mother's lap, exhausted by the excitement of the day. To Copper's Corner, Thomas raised his glass. And to the fool who bought it when everyone else knew better. To family, Maggie added. Real family, the kind that shows up when it matters. Walter lifted his own glass, but his toast was silent. To you, Sarah, for teaching me that worth isn't determined by what others think, for giving me Copper when I needed him most, for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. I finally became the man you always saw in me. I hope you're proud. Copper's tail wagged slowly as if the dog could sense the thoughts his master couldn't speak aloud. Always proud, always faithful, always yours. And somewhere, carried on the evening breeze, Walter could almost hear Sarah laughing. 1 year passed faster than Walter ever imagined possible. The house at Copper's Corner stood complete now, solid and warm, and filled with evidence of a life transformed. Photographs lined every wall, memories preserved in silver frames that caught the morning light. Sarah on their wedding day. Young Maggie learning carpentry from her mother. Copper as a puppy with ears too large for his head. And new photographs, 2 images that captured everything the last 12 months had brought. Walter stood before those photographs on a Tuesday morning, his coffee growing cold in his hands as he studied each face, each moment frozen in time. Papa? Maggie's voice carried from the kitchen. The reporter from Phoenix is here. He says you promised him an interview. I promised him nothing. Walter sighed and turned away from the memories. Thomas promised him. There's a difference that doesn't matter since he's already in the parlor. The reporter was young, eager, armed with a notebook and the hungry expression of someone chasing a story that could make his career. He stood when Walter entered, extending his hand with enthusiasm that bordered on aggressive. Mr. Brennan, thank you so much for agreeing to see me. The Phoenix Gazette has been following your story since the trial, and our readers are desperate to know what's happened since. Nothing interesting. Walter lowered himself into his chair, feeling every one of his 63 years. I rebuilt my house. I helped some neighbors. I watched my dog get old. Sir, you've become one of the wealthiest men in Arizona territory. You've established charitable foundations, funded a new school, built a veterinary clinic. Our readers would hardly call that nothing interesting. Walter glanced at Copper, who lay in his customary spot near the fireplace. The dog's muzzle had gone almost entirely gray now, and his limp had become more pronounced over the winter months. But those mismatched eyes remained as sharp as ever, watching the stranger with quiet assessment. Your readers want drama. They want excitement. Walter turned back to the reporter. What I have is something quieter, something that matters more but makes for poorer headlines. And what's that, sir? Purpose. Walter let the word hang in the air. For 62 years, I didn't know why I was put on this earth. I failed at farming. I failed at business. I watched my wife die without being able to give her the life she deserved. I spent decades proving everyone right about how worthless I was. The reporter scribbled furiously, sensing the kind of quote that editors loved. Then I bought a piece of land that everyone called cursed. I found a treasure that everyone thought was lost forever. And I learned something that all the money in the world couldn't teach me. What did you learn? Walter smiled. That worth isn't determined by success or failure. It's determined by whether you keep trying after everyone else has given up. It's determined by who stands beside you when everything falls apart. It's determined by the choices you make when no one's watching. The reporter looked up from his notebook. That's beautiful, Mr. Brennan. It's not beautiful. It's true. There's a difference. The interview continued for another hour, covering ground that Walter had traversed dozens of times with other reporters from other papers. The discovery, the battle, the trial, the aftermath. But when the young man finally packed away his notebook and prepared to leave, he asked one question that no one else had thought to ask. Mr. Brennan, if you could go back to that moment when you first saw the property, knowing everything that would happen, would you still buy it? Walter considered the question carefully. The terror of Shaw's attack, the pain of watching Copper nearly die, the weight of responsibility that came with sudden wealth. Every single time, he said finally. Not for the treasure. For everything the treasure showed me about myself, about my family, about what we're capable of when we stop listening to the voices that tell us we can't. The reporter left with his story, but Walter's answer stayed with him long after the young man had ridden away. Would he do it again every single time? Thomas arrived at noon with news that would change everything once more. The territorial governor wants to see you. Walter looked up from the ledger he had been reviewing. The governor, why? Something about recognition, a ceremony, some kind of award. Thomas dropped into the chairs across from his brother. I told his assistant you'd probably refuse, but he insisted I'd deliver the message anyway. You told him correctly? Walter. Thomas leaned forward. This isn't just about you. The governor wants to recognize everyone involved in stopping Shaw. That includes Maggie, that includes me, that includes... He paused significantly. Rachel Moreno. The name still carried weight even after a year. Rachel had served 6 months in territorial prison before receiving early release for her cooperation in Shaw's prosecution. She had disappeared after her release, and no one knew where she had gone. Rachel? Why would the governor want to recognize her? Because her testimony helped convict not just Shaw, but 3 other men connected to a robbery ring that had been operating across the territory for years. She gave investigators information that closed a dozen cases. Thomas shrugged. Apparently some people in government believe redemption should be rewarded. Walter thought about his last conversation with Rachel the day before Shaw's trial. Her tears, her confession, her desperate hope that she might become someone different. When is this ceremony? 3 weeks. Phoenix, the governor's mansion. Thomas's expression softened. You don't have to go, brother. No one would blame you for refusing, but I think Sarah would have wanted you to. The mention of his wife's name cut through Walter's resistance like a blade through cloth. Sarah had always believed in second chances. She had married Walter despite his failures. She had supported him through years of struggle. She had given him copper as her final act of faith. If she were here, she would tell him to go. Tell the governor's assistant that I accept. Thomas grinned. I already did. I knew you'd come around. You presumptuous... I'm your brother. Presumption comes with the territory. They laughed together, the easy sound of family reconciled, of bonds repaired after years of distance. Walter would go to Phoenix. He would accept whatever recognition the governor wanted to give. And he would face Rachel Moreno one more time to see if the redemption she had sought had actually taken root. The journey to Phoenix took 3 days by wagon. Walter traveled with Thomas, Maggie, and Jimmy, leaving Copper in the care of ranch hands, who had grown to love the aging dog almost as much as Walter did. The farewell had been harder than Walter expected. I'll be back in a week, he told Copper, kneeling beside the dog's resting place. Don't get any ideas about following me this time. Copper's tail wagged weakly. Those mismatched eyes held an understanding that went beyond animal intelligence. Go, I'll be here when you return. But there was something else in those eyes, too. Something that looked almost like farewell. Walter pushed the thought away and climbed onto the wagon. Phoenix overwhelmed him. Walter had spent his entire life in small towns and open country. The territorial capital, with its crowded streets and constant noise, felt like a different world entirely. Everywhere he turned, people recognized him. Some pointed and whispered. Others approached directly, wanting to shake his hand or simply stand close to the man whose story had captured the territory's imagination. "How do you deal with this?" Walter asked Thomas as they navigated through yet another crowd of admirers. "I don't." Thomas guided him toward a quieter side street. "I'm just the brother. You're the legend." "I never wanted to be a legend." "No one does. That's usually how legends happen." The governor's mansion occupied the most prestigious address in the city. Guards checked their credentials at the gate, then escorted them through hallways filled with portraits of territorial officials and historical artifacts. Governor Lewis Frederick Murphy waited in his private office, a portly man in his 50s with the shrewd eyes of a career politician and the practiced smile of someone who had learned to please crowds. "Mr. Brennan," Murphy grasped Walter's hand with both of his own. "I've been looking forward to meeting you for months. Your story has inspired people across the entire territory." "I didn't set out to inspire anyone, Governor. I just refused to let go of something I believed in." "And that's exactly what makes your story so powerful." Murphy gestured toward a sitting area. "Please join me. We have much to discuss before tomorrow's ceremony." The conversation covered familiar ground. The discovery, the defense, the trial. But Murphy surprised Walter with the depth of his knowledge about events that hadn't made it into the newspapers. "I understand you've been quite generous with your fortune," Murphy said, accepting a cup of coffee from a servant. "The Brennan Foundation has provided assistance to over 200 families in the past year alone." 317. Walter sipped his own coffee. "Not that I'm counting." "You're not counting, but the families you've helped certainly are. Do you know what they call you in some of the rural communities? The Angel of Copper's Corner?" "Kid." Walter nearly choked on his drink. "I'm no angel. I'm just a man who remembers what it's like to have nothing." "That's precisely what makes your generosity so meaningful." Murphy leaned forward. "I have a proposal for you, Mr. Brennan, one that could extend your impact far beyond what you've accomplished so far." "I'm listening." "The territory needs people like you. People who understand hardship but haven't been hardened by it. People who have resources but remember what it's like to lack them." Murphy paused significantly. "I'd like to appoint you to the Territorial Development Council, an advisory position that would give you influence over how resources are allocated to communities across Arizona." Walter stared at the governor. "You want me to get involved in politics?" "I want you to get involved in helping people. Politics is just the mechanism." The offer was unexpected, and Walter needed time to process its implications. A position on the council would give him power to help families like the one he had once been, but it would also thrust him further into the public eye, further from the quiet life he had hoped to build at Copper's Corner. "I'll consider it," he said finally, "but I make no promises." Murphy smiled. "That's all I ask." The ceremony took place the following afternoon in the mansion's grand ballroom. Walter stood on the stage alongside Thomas, Maggie, and young Jimmy, who had insisted on wearing a suit that made him look like a miniature businessman. The governor delivered a speech about courage, perseverance, and the power of ordinary people to achieve extraordinary things. Walter barely heard a word of it. His attention was fixed on a figure standing at the back of the room, half hidden in shadows. Rachel Moreno had come. She looked different than Walter remembered. The haunted quality that had defined her during the trial had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. She wore simple clothes, practical rather than fashionable, and her posture carried none of the deceptive grace she had displayed as Shaw's spy. When the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Walter made his way toward her. "Miss Moreno? Mr. Brennan?" She didn't retreat from his approach, but her body tensed with uncertainty. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me. I wasn't sure you'd come." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two people whose lives had intersected in violence and betrayal and unexpected redemption. "The governor invited me," Rachel finally said. "I tried to decline, but his assistant was very persuasive." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Apparently, my testimony helped close cases that had been open for years. Some people think that deserves recognition." "Trust me, what do you think?" "I think recognition doesn't erase what I did. It doesn't bring back the people Shaw hurt or undo the families I helped destroy." Rachel's voice dropped. "But it helps me believe that maybe I can still become someone worth being." Walter studied her face, searching for any trace of the deception he had once missed so completely. He found only exhaustion, determination, and the fragile hope of someone rebuilding from ruins. Where have you been since the trial, Mama? Tucson, working at a hospital there. They needed nurses, and I needed to do something useful with my hands. Rachel hesitated. I've been thinking about going back to school, becoming a real nurse instead of just pretending to be one. But education costs money, and I spent everything I had on legal fees. Walter made a decision that surprised even himself. The Brennan Foundation provides scholarships for people seeking to improve their circumstance. I'd like you to apply. Rachel's eyes widened. Mr. Brennan, I couldn't. You could, and you should. Walter's voice softened. Sarah always believed that people could change. She married me despite all evidence to the contrary. I think she'd want me to offer you the same faith she offered me. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes. Why, after everything I did, why would you help me? Because you chose differently when it mattered most. Because you stood with us instead of against us. Because I believe the person who picked up that rifle and shot Shaw's man was the real Rachel Moreno, not the spy who came to my property pretending to be a nurse. Rachel broke down completely, sobbing with a release that drew concerned looks from nearby guests. Walter stood quietly beside her, offering presence rather than comfort, understanding that some grief needed to be expressed before it could begin to heal. Thank you, she whispered when she finally regained control. Thank you for believing I can be better. Don't thank me. Prove me right. She nodded, wiping her tears with trembling hands. I will. I promise, Mr. Brennan. I will. Walter watched her leave the ballroom, a different woman than the one who had arrived. Whether she would keep her promise remained to be seen, but he had given her a chance. That was all anyone could do. The journey home felt longer than the journey out. Walter sat in the wagon, watching the Arizona landscape roll past, thinking about everything that had happened in Phoenix. The ceremony, the governor's offer, his encounter with Rachel. You're quiet, Maggie observed from beside him. Even for you. I'm thinking. About the council position. Walter nodded slowly. The governor wants me to help decide how resources get allocated across the territory. That's real power, Maggie. Power to help people who are struggling the way we once struggled. But power changes people. I've seen it happen to men better than me. Walter turned to face his daughter. What if I become someone I don't recognize? What if all this money and influence turns me into Thomas used to be? Hey, Thomas called from the driver's seat. I'm sitting right here. You know what I mean. Thomas pulled the horses to a stop and turned around. Brother, I spent 30 years looking down on you because I thought success meant having more than everyone else. I was wrong. Success means being surrounded by people who would fight for you when everything falls apart. He gestured at the wagon's occupants. You have Maggie, who defied everyone to stand with you. You have Jimmy, who rode alone through dangerous country to bring help. You have me, even though I don't deserve to be counted. His voice thickened with emotion. And you have Copper, who nearly killed himself trying to show you something no one else could see. What's your point? My point is that you can't become someone you don't recognize. Not with this family watching you. We won't let you. Thomas smiled. Take the council position, use the power to help people, and if you ever start becoming someone you shouldn't be, trust us to knock sense back into you. Maggie laughed. He's right, Papa. We've gotten pretty good at fighting alongside you. Fighting to keep you yourself should be easier. Jimmy, who had been sleeping against his mother's shoulder, stirred awake. Are we home yet? Almost, son. Walter ruffled the boy's hair. Almost home. But even as he spoke the words, a weight settled in his chest that had nothing to do with his failing heart. Something was wrong. He could feel it. They reached Copper's Corner at sunset on the third day. The ranch hands who had been caring for the property greeted them with expressions that confirmed Walter's fears before anyone spoke a word. Mr. Brennan? Old Tom, who had worked for Thomas for 20 years, stepped forward with hat in hands. It's Copper, sir. He took a turn yesterday. The vet says... He couldn't finish the sentence. Walter was out of the wagon before it stopped moving. He found Copper in the bedroom they had shared for 9 years, lying on the old blanket Sarah had made before she died. The dog's breathing was shallow, labored, each inhale a struggle that seemed to drain whatever strength remained. But when Walter entered, Copper's tail moved. Hey, boy! Walter's voice broke as he knelt beside his oldest friend. Hey, I'm back, just like I promised. Copper's eyes found Walter's face. Those mismatched eyes that had seen through Shaw's deceptions. That had found the treasure no one else could find. That had watched over Walter through grief and triumph and everything in between. You came back. Of course I came back. I'll always come back for you. Walter gathered the dog gently into his arms, feeling how light Copper had become, how fragile. 9 years of partnership. 9 years of loyalty that had never wavered, never questioned, never demanded anything in return. You saved me, you know that. Walter's tears fell freely now soaking into gray fur. When Sarah died, you were the only reason I kept going. When the whole world told me I was worthless, you looked at me like I was the most important person alive. Copper's tail wagged one more time. Weak but determined. Still trying to comfort his master even now. You found the treasure. You protected our family. You did everything a dog could possibly do and more. Walter pressed his forehead against Copper's. It's okay to rest now, boy. It's okay to let go. Copper's breathing slowed. His eyes stayed fixed on Walter's face. I found you, those eyes said one last time. I was always supposed to find you. And then with a final exhale that carried the weight of 9 years of love, Copper was gone. Walter held his dog's body for a long time, crying with a grief that seemed to have no bottom. Maggie found him there an hour later, still cradling Copper, still whispering words of thanks and farewell and love. She sat beside him without speaking, her arm around his shoulders, her own tears falling silently. He waited for you, she finally said. The vet said he shouldn't have lasted as long as he did, but he held on until you came home. That's Copper? Walter's voice was raw from crying. Never gave up on anything he believed in. Just like someone else I know. They buried Copper the next morning at sunrise. Walter chose the spot himself, the place where Copper had first started digging all those months ago. The corner of floor that had hidden a fortune. The corner that had changed everything. Thomas and Maggie helped dig the grave while Jimmy gathered wildflowers to place on top. When the hole was ready, Walter lowered Copper's body gently into the earth, wrapped in Sarah's old blanket. I don't know what to say, Walter admitted, standing over the grave. All the words feels too small. Then don't use words, Thomas suggested. Show us what Copper meant to you. Walter thought for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew the leather collar Copper had worn since the day Sarah brought him home. This collar was a gift from my wife, he said, holding it up so everyone could see. She put it on Copper the first day we met. She told me that as long as Copper wore it, I would never be alone. He knelt and placed the collar gently in the grave beside Copper's body. I'm going to be alone now in a way I haven't been since Sarah died. But I'm also going to carry both of them with me forever. The woman who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, and the dog who proved her right. They filled the grave in silence. When the last shovel of earth had been placed, Walter remained standing at the site while the others retreated to give him privacy. I know you can't hear me anymore, he said quietly, but I need to say this anyway. The wind stirred through the property, carrying the scent of sage and promise. Thank you for finding me when I was lost. Thank you for leading me to something that changed my life. Thank you for showing me that the broken things, the dismissed things, the worthless things that everyone else overlooks sometimes turn out to be the most valuable of all. He touched the freshly turned earth with trembling fingers. I'm going to try to be worthy of what you gave me, Copper. Every day for however many I have left, and when it's my turn to go, I hope you'll be waiting for me somewhere. You and Sarah both. A bird called from somewhere nearby. The sound was clear and sweet, and somehow comforting. Walter smiled through his tears. I'll take that as a yes. The months that followed Copper's death were the hardest Walter had faced since losing Sarah. The house felt empty without the click of claws on wooden floors. The bed felt cold without a warm body pressed against his feet. Every corner held memories that caught him unexpectedly and brought fresh waves of grief. But life continued. It always did. Walter accepted the governor's council position, throwing himself into work that gave his days purpose and his nights something other than memories to occupy. He helped allocate resources to drought-affected communities. He advocated for families struggling to keep their land. He used his voice and his influence to speak for people who had no voice of their own. Maggie flourished in ways no one had predicted. Using skills her mother had taught her, she became one of the first female land surveyors in Arizona Territory. Her work took her across the region, mapping boundaries and settling disputes and proving that women could succeed in fields that had always belonged to men. Your mother would be so proud of you, Walter told her one evening as they sat on the porch at Copper's Corner. You've become everything she hoped you would be. I learned from both of you, Maggie replied. From Mama, I learned how to work with my hands. From you, I learned how to work with my heart. Jimmy grew from a brave boy into a determined young man with clear ambitions. The night he announced his intention to become a veterinarian, Walter felt Copper's presence so strongly that he had to leave the room to compose himself. I want to help animals the way the doctor helped Copper, Jimmy explained when Walter returned. I want to give them more time with the people who love them. That's a noble goal, son. Will you help me? Mama says veterinary school costs a lot of money. Walter laughed for the first time in weeks. I think we can manage the tuition. Thomas became a different man entirely. The proud, dismissive brother who had spent decades looking down on Walter transformed into someone who seemed genuinely interested in making amends for lost time. I wasted so many years, Thomas admitted during one of their regular dinners together. Years I could have spent being your brother instead of your critic. You're my brother now. That's what matters. Is it enough? Can we really make up for everything that's past? Walter considered the question. The resentment he had carried for so long had faded over the past year, replaced by something that felt almost like gratitude. We can't change the past, he said finally, but we can choose what we do with the future. Every day we spend together is a day we didn't have before. Every conversation, every shared meal, every moment of genuine connection. It adds up, Thomas. It becomes something real. Even after everything I said, everything I did. Especially after that. Walter gripped his brother's shoulder. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward anyway. Sarah taught me that. Copper reinforced it. Now I'm passing it on to you. Rachel Moreno graduated from nursing school 18 months after the ceremony in Phoenix. Walter received the news through a letter that arrived on a spring morning, the handwriting neat and careful on paper that showed signs of multiple drafts. Dear Mr. Brennan, she had written, I wanted you to be the first to know. I passed my examinations yesterday. I am now officially a licensed nurse qualified to help people heal instead of helping them suffer. I know this doesn't erase what I did. I know forgiveness isn't something I can earn through certificates and diplomas. But I hope it shows you that your faith wasn't misplaced. That when you chose to believe I could change, you were right. I've taken a position at a hospital in Santa Fe, far from Arizona, far from everyone who knew me as Shaw's woman, a fresh start in a place where no one knows my history. But I'll carry your lesson with me wherever I go. The lesson that worth isn't determined by your worst moments, that people can change if given the chance, that redemption is possible even for those who feel they don't deserve it. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Thank you for seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Your friend Rachel. Walter read the letter 3 times before folding it carefully and placing it in the drawer where he kept his most precious possessions. Sarah's wedding ring, Copper's old collar, Morning Star's copied journal, and now evidence that faith in human redemption could sometimes be justified. 7 years after the discovery of the treasure, Walter Brennan sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of orange and gold. His body had grown frail with age, his heart had grown weaker, but his spirit remained unbroken. The doctor had stopped making predictions about how much time he had left. Walter had outlived so many of those predictions that the physician had given up making new ones. Grandpa, Jimmy, now 15 and nearly as tall as his grandfather, appeared in the doorway. Mama says dinner is ready. In a minute, son. Jimmy hesitated, then sat down beside Walter. The boy had grown into a serious young man with his grandmother Sarah's eyes and his mother's determination. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you ever regret it, buying this place when everyone said you were crazy? Walter smiled at the familiar question. Every day I wake up grateful, Jimmy, not for the money. Money comes and goes. I'm grateful because this place taught me who I really was. It taught me that the voices telling you you're worthless are almost always wrong. But how did you know? How did you know the voices were wrong when everyone believed them? Walter considered the question carefully. It deserved a thoughtful answer. I didn't know, not for certain. I just chose to believe differently. He turned to face his grandson. That's the secret nobody tells you, Jimmy. There's no moment of certainty, no sign from heaven saying you're on the right path. There's only the choice to keep going when everything tells you to stop. And Copper, did he know? Copper knew something was under that floor, something important, but he didn't know what it was any more than I did. Walter's voice softened with the memory. He just trusted his instincts and refused to give up. That's all any of us can do, really. Trust what we feel, refuse to give up, and hope that somewhere along the way we'll find what we're looking for. Jimmy was quiet for a long moment, processing wisdom that would take years to fully understand. I miss him, the boy finally said. Copper, I mean. I still expect to see him when I walk through the door. So do I, son, every single day. They sat in comfortable silence, grandfather and grandson watching the sky deepen from orange to purple to the first scattered stars of evening. "Grandpa, yes, I am going to make you proud. When I become a veterinarian, when I help animals like Copper, I'm going to make sure everyone knows it's because of you, because you showed me what it means to believe in something everyone else has given up on." Walter felt tears threatening and didn't try to stop them. "You already make me proud, Jimmy, every day, just by being exactly who you are." Maggie appeared in the doorway. "If you two don't come inside, dinner will be completely cold." "We're coming." Walter rose slowly, his joints protesting the movement, but his heart felt lighter than it had in months. Jimmy offered his arm for support, and Walter took it gratefully. Together, they walked into the house, where 3 generations of family waited around a table built from wood salvaged from the original shack. Thomas sat at one end, telling a story that made everyone laugh. Maggie moved between kitchen and dining room, orchestrating the meal with quiet efficiency. Jimmy's laughter rang clear and young and full of promise. Walter paused at the threshold, taking in the scene before him. This was his legacy, not the money, not the treasure, not even the story that had made him famous across the territory. His legacy was this family reunited and strengthened by adversity. This grandson who would heal animals the way Copper had healed Walter. This daughter who had become everything her mother had dreamed. This brother who had finally learned that success without love was no success at all. And somewhere woven through all of it, the spirit of a dog who had refused to stop digging until he found what mattered most. "Coming?" Maggie asked. "Coming." Walter stepped into the warmth of his family, into the life that had been built on a foundation of faith and stubbornness and love. The worthless Apache shack had become a home worth everything. The dismissed old man had become someone worth remembering. And the loyal dog who had started it all would live forever in the hearts of everyone whose lives he had changed. That night, after dinner, after stories. After Jimmy had gone to bed and Thomas had departed for his own ranch, Walter returned to the porch one final time. The stars blazed overhead, countless points of light scattered across the infinite darkness. In that moment, standing alone in the place that had transformed his life, Walter felt the presence of everyone he had loved and lost. Sarah smiling at him with the faith she had never abandoned. Copper waiting at his feet with tail wagging and eyes bright. Morning star keeper of secrets, guardian of treasure, kindred spirit across the generations. "I hope I made you proud," Walter whispered to all of them. "I hope I became the man you believed I could be." The wind stirred through Copper's corner, carrying the scent of sage and earth, and something that smelled almost like hope. Walter closed his eyes and smiled. He had spent 62 years believing he was worthless. He had spent 7 years proving that belief wrong. And in the end, the greatest treasure he had found wasn't silver at all. It was the knowledge that worth comes not from what others think of you, but from what you choose to think of yourself. It was the understanding that broken things can be mended, dismissed things can be valued, and hopeless things can become the foundation of something extraordinary. It was the love of a family reunited, a community transformed, and a legacy that would outlast silver and outlast memory and outlast even death itself. Walter Brennan had been laughed at, dismissed, and written off by everyone who thought they knew his value. But his dog had known better. His dog had found the secret room. And in finding that room, Copper had unlocked something far more precious than treasure. He had unlocked the truth that had been buried inside Walter all along. The truth that every human being carries within them. The capacity for greatness waiting for someone or something to help them dig down deep enough to find it. Walter opened his eyes and looked one last time at the property that had changed everything. His property, his home. His proof that the worthless things are often the most valuable of all, and that the ones who perdent bon to believe, but before leave when no one else will, are the ones who find what everyone else misses. The family had laughed when he bought the useless Apache shack. They weren't laughing anymore. And somewhere beyond the stars, a loyal dog with mismatched eyes was wagging his tail, proud of the master who had finally learned to believe in himself.